Good morning, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Wednesday, April 1st, 2026 at 9:02 in the morning. So we're beginning our day to start taking a further deep dive into S327, which is the Economic Development Bill we received from the Senate. You'll notice there is a new section that Rick has added. We don't have Rick with us this morning, but we'll be talking. While we had Commissioner Jepson with us to talk about the bill as a whole. But good morning, Commissioner. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. Here with Nick Grimley, who is the Deputy Commissioner, Jess Hartleton, who is our Pepsi Executive Director. And we would be happy to talk to you about any and all. We know we have 3 hours, so let's go. 2 minutes.
2 hours.
What would you like to address first? I've got a couple of suggestions for changes if you are so willing. We can walk through each component. What would be the best?
I think let's start looking at, there's a lot of deleted sections in there, but wherever you'd like to start.
All right, well, there are particularly 4 different sections of this, one of which is a report that Nick and I will be putting together assuming the bill passes in its current form, where we would like to highlight the different levels of support that businesses will need, all the way from business ideation to maturity and sale or passing it on to some other entities. There has been some question out there as to what supports are available, what financial supports are available, where can people get marketing support, those types of things. We have a plethora of organizations in the state of Vermont that are very helpful. And if you go to the Secretary of State's office, you can actually see a lot of those, but I'm not sure that everyone knows they can go to the Secretary of State's office to see all those. And then what do you do with it once you get there? So Nick and I will be, hopefully will commission us to do a study and come back to you in December with an outline of how we would like to communicate all of the good things that are out there right now. And we may have suggestions as far as other things that we would like to see happen that would be supportive again of businesses either growing or moving into the state. Part of it is also a financial piece. Where can people get financial support, whether that's through VITA or other options, grants, and so forth. But we'd like to kind of put that together in a piece that is a little bit more dynamic that people can take a look at and reference as they work through their business plan. One change I would like to make, if you are so willing, it is under where it says report, and it's number 4. It says determine how best to market and communicate the inventory resources. Respectfully ask that you take the word market out, because that implies that we are going to spend money to go out and market this somehow. We don't have a budget for that, but we do have a mechanism to communicate all of that. So we would like to be able to come back and show you how we're going to be communicating what we're creating in the absence of a budget to actually get that. Next one comment. Yes.
So I appreciate that. That's actually the number 4 was the one that I was the most focused on. I mean, all of them are really important, and it is a nice comprehensive way to think about business in Vermont, really, from the inception, funding, what happens, right? I appreciate that, but that was the piece that knowing the folks in my community who have started small businesses, and when I mentioned some of the supports that are available to them, they're where? How do I, yes, how do I find that? And so communicate, publicize, right? Something more than just communicate, I think it's going to be helpful. And I appreciate market might not be the right word, but are you thinking a website? Are you thinking a one-stop shop? What are you, and I know we're before a report, before you've even done an inventory, but
that will be the end of the day. One thing that I would like to work very closely with is the RDCs, because they are our boots on the ground. And we would love to have businesses going to the RDCs for that first point of contact, because what you're describing in that look that you just made is an in-person look.
Yes.
That I'm confused and I don't know where to go. we want to have that in-person activity available to people. And Jonathan down in Bennington may or may not know exactly who to go to next, but he is the dot connector. And he would be able to then research where that person should be looking for information. We would like to have that information in a pool of opportunity that all of the people who are the boots on the ground out there can then go to. And what that exactly will be, we're not quite sure.
Yeah, I just, and I'll just, so my gut reaction to that, which we don't always trust, but we kind of listen to all the time, is, most people are starting on their device and not in a face-to-face. And so when you start thinking about it, you look around, what is there? And your device, whatever device it happens to be, and as addicted to them as we are, right, is the way that we start. And so I would hope that resource is high on your chart of how to ensure that the information is available to folks.
Easily accessible. is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. From my couch, right? Like, I mean, I'm not gonna open a business anytime soon, but
Frankly, that's where that happens. It happens at midnight that I need something and where do I look? And
I just had this great idea, yeah. And does it work?
For the record, Nick Grimley, Deputy Commissioner Economic Development. I'd just like to add that, we recognize that, some people talk about a one-stop shop, and I don't think that's how people operate. There is no one-stop shop for this type of thing. What we are aiming to do is identify the different entry points and then make sure that we are communicating to all those different entry points so that, the person that is sitting on their couch and maybe going to the Think Vermont website is finding it, or maybe they're reaching out to SBDC and they're getting the information, or through the RDC, basically mapping out what those different entry points are, and then coming up with a plan to communicate and publicize that information out to those channels.
I just want to echo what he is saying. Having started 4 businesses in the state, I had no idea until a few years ago that there were any of these resources available. What I see more, as I continue to look for technical support on running my business, like to Edie's point, like on my phone, I get on the internet. But the first thing when I type in my problem and I see a list that comes up, I'm like, are these companies even legit, or are they going to rip me off? So one of the things I think is really important in doing what you're doing is integrity is huge. I would love to go to a place, and like you said, not necessarily a one-stop shop, but maybe a place where you have companies that have at least gone through some level of vetting, at least verify that they are in the state of Vermont. I mean, anything where I can go to that site, I can kind of look at what I need. And I have a list of people that are experts in that field that I can go to, that I know at least there's been some vetting on.
That official site of. Thank you.
I think just to bounce off what Tony was saying, I think there ends up being a need to be at the top of the SEO stack and making sure that it is easily searchable. And so there may, on the whole marketing, communicating, like conversation, there may need to be some investments in showing that our official Vermont state properties are the top of the circles.
Thank you for doing this. I appreciate that, you're going to at least, engage the rural development corporations, because I think they do have boots on the ground. My experience, and especially in my district, is that the RDC only has its boots on the ground for towns of a certain size. And once they get to be really small, they never hear from the RDCs. They never see the RDCs. Some of them don't even basically know that the RDC exists. And so I want to make sure that you reach out to those smaller, less than 2,000, maybe less than 1,000. I have a town that's 300 people. You don't exist. And even if you did, they don't have the resources to take advantage of any of it. And so for my piece, I think the bigger ones take care of themselves better than the little ones, and you need to look out for the little ones.
So can you sort of talk a little bit about what you see as like qualifies as a resource? Like, I mean, I sort of, I feel like just the language in here is a little on the broad side. So like, what is, you know, when you're thinking about envisioning the study, what do you think of as, how broad is the definition of resource?
One of the things that we will do is we'll sit down and we're going to create that stakeholder list.
Yeah.
Because like this board behind you, there are wide variety of opportunity out there. From VMAC to the Small Business Development Center to just I'm gonna miss people when I start suggesting all the resources. We need to look at the categories that we're gonna socialize with those. Whether it's a startup, whether it's a mid-level business, whether it's a mature business, and the types of activities that are out there that we're supporting. Too often, I think we forget about the organizations that are already there, like the Small Business Development Center. We need to communicate that and get it in front of people in an easy way so that they are aware that it's there. Go back to your point, wasn't even aware that it was there. We'll be defining this a little bit more as we go through. And I think some of the definitions will become more self-evident as we investigate all the different stakeholders. As a former RDC person, I'd like to think that I know that are out there. I'm pretty sure I don't know all of them that are out there now that I'm in a different position right now. And so it will take some time. And I'm not specifically answering your question because we're just getting started.
I'm curious to know about your relationship with the Secretary of State office, because I also find that the vast majority, I could be wrong, but a lot of businesses have to get registered with the state. So I'm wondering, yeah, will that be a part of this? Is that at least like a point of contact that people like, oh, you're starting a business?
Nick's looking to answer that question. I can show.
Yes, so several years ago, we worked with Secretary of State's office. It initially started as a letter or an email that would get sent to every business that registered in the state of Vermont, introducing them to the Commissioner of Economic Development and the different services that are offered through the department. That has since expanded to become an email that goes out with resources throughout the state that are available for businesses. It includes a wide range of organizations. So over the years, we have worked with the Secretary of State's office to develop that, and they will certainly be a stakeholder in this discussion as well.
Sounds like this is like building off of that. Right?
Yes, yeah. We've engaged with David Hall there.
So if you remember the one-stop portal went live in the Secretary of State's office last summer. And so that's something that we had worked on in here for I don't know how many years to get it going. Where it's a one-stop, so when you create your business, it's gonna populate a list of where you might need to go for a permit, where you can go for licenses, where do you go for help, that kind of thing. So that, I guess, let's continue to evolve.
But something, I just wanted to bounce off of Kurt with the RDCs. I have not been particularly thrilled with our, I live in a population of 11,000 people. And I don't remember I haven't seen anyone from RDC in like 10 years. And I work in the planning commission, I'm chair of the planning commission. I work pretty closely with the select board and the town manager. I don't know if there needs to be a realignment of responsibilities or whatnot, but I know, from my perspective in planning, I don't feel like I've gotten a whole lot of support from RDCs. RPC's been great.
We have another conversation in the future.
Yes. And to bounce off of what you were saying, every time someone creates a business, usually you get a response. Seems like that'd be a really good place for them to say, hey, here's a receipt of your fee. Here are some resources to help you with your business.
So it sounds like we want to do something similar to the Office of Workforce Strategy. development. That's exactly the issue that we had when we created the SOCWED, was we didn't know, who's doing what, where are the resources, and that's what they're doing now, is creating that inventory and I think what the proposal is here is to do something similar to that, is to, let's find out how many organizations are out there to help businesses. How do you get in touch with them? Where are the resources? Resources that we provide through you and other resources that may be out there from nonprofits to help communities, to help businesses thrive. We don't have that right now.
We're cross-pollinating there, Nick and I are in the committee as well, working on that. That workforce component is key to business development, that we need to know about the Vermont training program and other things that are out there that are being funded.
Yeah, and I think, when you're thinking about those sort of resources and also service providers, it includes, trade groups and business organization. I mean, there's so many I'm always learning about a new place that like, oh, they provide very specific sector specific advice, for example. And so, yeah, I guess that's the big thing, is I think it's really needs to be thought of as sort of beyond just the usual suspects to like all of the different touch points. Yeah, that's
To your point, stakeholders, the Association of Builders and Contractors.
right.
AGC. AGC just opened a new facility in Winooski, I believe, where they're doing education and training for the trades. Those types of things need to be on our list.
Yep.
Thanks. So part of the challenge of studies is are we talking about a snapshot of the world as it was on or before December 15th, 2026? And those things are always changing, and formal networks and informal networks are sort of moving around a lot. The first thing I want to know is if, based on what's in all of these 8 points, is December 15th a reasonable amount of time? And so that's one question. And then question 2 is, I guess, something that's to be articulated when this comes to materialize is what is the appropriate level of scrutiny that you're thinking of, or is that some conversation we had at a later date where there's the impressionist painting does not have every single detail. If you step back, you can see it perfectly. What is the sort of granularity that you'd be able to work to?
First question first, timeframe. When we were asked, we said by Senate, they suggested that it would be a 2-year study. And our response really was, why do we want to take 2 years? Let's go out and report. So this is not necessarily a study. This is a report of what currently is alive and living out there, and it's an opportunity. From that, we will then come back to you folks and say, here are some recommendations as we move forward. There might be recommendations for funding. There might be recommendations we don't know yet. But we would like to come back to you with that initial work, because I think that will be the launching point to what you're describing, which is the scrutiny. It needs to be living somehow so that we can add to this and subtract them. Last time I was here, I think I said Vermont's great. It started something when we have a problem, but then that organization or committee never goes away, and then they start looking for other things to do. We want to make sure that some things maybe do go away that are no longer necessary, and the things that are necessary continue to be in place. Don't know if I'm answering the question, but you'll tell me.
Yeah, I would just add, like, I don't think we want to make this the kitchen sink and throw everything into it. It does need to, in order for it to be useful, it does need to be restricted in some way.
And it's meant to inform these committees.
Yes.
Basically.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know how exactly it does separate from the work that the Office of Workforce Development is doing, or if this is a duplication of efforts.
That would be a subset. They're very focused on the workforce.
Okay, so this is designed as a subset.
Right.
Of the work.
Right. Ours is probably more broad. Theirs could would fill in a piece of workforce development within businesses. Because the workforce development piece is critical to whatever size business you have. And there will be opportunities and options out there for education and training that those levels of businesses will need. Whether that's a VEGI grant through the Vermont Economic Progress Council or the Vermont Training Program or something through the Department of Labor. So it's right now, as I look at it, it's a plate of spaghetti. And we want to make sure those pieces are connected very effectively.
So one other question, and this is probably a segue to our next topic. When you're looking at how do we support business growth, VEGI is one of the ways that we are supporting business growth. And we know that it only works well in times, say it differently, it works less well in times when our unemployment rate is as low as it is today than it does when our unemployment rate is high, right? And so what we've talked about in this committee often is, are there other economic development, business development incentives that we can put in our state to grow business at other times too, to grow the economy at other times too? And I'm wondering if there is a spot in this study, because we've talked about all these other groups that are getting together, think tanks, think tank groups that are getting together to talk about what do we need? Do we need to hire someone? Do we need to, we've heard from lots of different consultants, and people can plug and play from other states. And Vermont we're small. We have been small business, and every time we try to grow big business, it's just not really supporting as many. I don't know. Anyway, I'm waxing here, but is there a part of your study that lends itself toward what other economic incentives would be beneficial?
I'm going to suggest, and I don't know what the report is going to look like at the end of the day, but I'm going to suggest that there probably are going to be holes. And there are going to be things that the report will identify as opportunities for the future. We have looked, last year we had an intern look at many, many different states about all the different things that are out there and what would be an opportunity for the state of Vermont. As you know, we don't have a lot of incentives. We would like to have more incentives, but as we think about that, if I say TIP and CHIP work so well, is that there's not necessarily money put in. And so we don't have to add to the budget to do that. So those might be the things we'd be looking for, is what can we add that will not necessarily cause the budget to go up? So with Jonathan, I'm going to talk around your question a little bit, because we don't know what the report is actually going to tell us at the end of the day.
How opposed to having a sentence leading you in that direction would be in
So you're looking
language?
for recommendations.
Yeah. I mean, there's a sentence for recommendations for legislative action, maybe something about recommendations for economic growth incentives.
And then we're going to get back to time and how much time, because in our mind, correct me if I'm wrong, that this was going to be a report about what is currently here. And from that, and the reason we wanted to do that first was we didn't want to wait 2 years to come back and do the report and potential recommendation. I think some recommendations will come from this, but I don't want to promise that.
Yeah.
Within the time frame that we have to do the report.
Maybe we put it in findings or legislative intent language or something like that.
Like an ongoing report that comes back and gives you a preliminary report in December, and then final report a year later. There's more things that need to be looked at.
So you see that the final item in this report is identify, this is here on page 3, identify investor education opportunities for high net worth individuals interested in investing in Vermont businesses. That seems less reporty, and I mean, that seems like an example of like a recommendation finding, and when I read that, I wasn't sure how, I didn't love it, but I was just wondering if that's the kind of, I saw that as a thing that could be a big rabbit hole, as, identifying investor education opportunities for high net worth individuals who are interested in doing these investments. And I was just thinking, there's a lot of different pieces to that sentence. And that struck me as a thing that would be a hard December situation, but, I know for some people, hey, you're proposing adding sentences, I was wondering, oh, maybe we could add a sentence if we remove the sentence. It's, that one didn't seem to follow or fit so comfortably in the report, so, yeah, did you feel similarly about that, or how well does that December 8 match with the reporting?
Have a comment on that? Nick?
Yeah, sure.
You and I talked about that.
Yeah, so the Senate was interested in exploring that. I think it is, I don't think it's a heavy lift for us, knowing what I know and having been involved in the venture capital space for a number of years. I don't think that's a heavy lift for us.
I'm glad, yeah, okay.
I think we have to.
So piggybacking a little bit about what Brandon was talking about, I mean, I guess the way I'm thinking of this is almost like sort of like a SWOT analysis, right? Where you're really cataloging what's out there. So looking at strength and then also cataloging it all. And then maybe identifying what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what are some, maybe not saying here are the economic incentives we could do, but you're saying, hey, there maybe is an opportunity for an economic incentive for legacy manufacturers and make, whatever. And then, and also saying, what are some threats? And that seems like a way to, then the legislature next year, sort of going into it is like becomes a bit of a sort of construct to help identify where to focus. So like maybe there's this report of all the resources and weaknesses. There's no website in which you can go that is, always updated and that somebody can, whatever it is. So you're not doing it, but you're identifying something, an opportunity, right? So I don't know that maybe that somehow we can put it sort of in the intent of the report that we're really looking for, like, okay, now we know that
It's not.
here's a lay of the land, what's next? And how do we, because I appreciate that it's not a 2-year report, that it's 6 months or 9 months, whatever. And with the idea of being it's the first step.
I was gonna just add, I think that, if you're looking for the full absolute landscape of what could possibly be done, that's pretty broad.
Yeah.
If you're, for us to identify some low hanging fruit, where we could see some impact.
Yeah.
Then I think
That's kind of what I have in
that's
mind.
I
It's
think
like-
that's a doable place.
Yeah, so it's like iterations and continuous improvement.
Right.
Kind of mindset.
There's 4 other parts. I said there were only 4 parts in here, but actually there are 5. One is the veggie piece. That's Dr. Bennett is here and she can speak to any of the questions you have specifically about veggie. We would like to think that it's time to keep this forevermore and not keep bringing this up year after year. It is a successful program. We have businesses that are accessing it. Jess could speak to the positives. How would you like to, or do you want to talk about it, or just say, yep, we're in agreement, we're moving forward?
I don't know that we're there yet.
We'd be happy to help you get there if that's, can be helpful.
We'll talk to Jess.
Okay.
Keep on the agenda.
All right, great. The next part is a study that will, a culinary institute study, that will be undertaken by the Office of Workforce Management and Development. That will be their charge. I don't know if I can answer any specific questions around that, but focus was to determine, one, if we should, and how would we, if we should, have a school of culinary arts again here in the state.
I think we had an impromptu discussion a little bit with Sabina yesterday. And I don't know that we think that the Office of Workforce Strategy and Development is the right convener. I worry that they still have a lot of work to do and it's only a 2-person office. And I'm kind of skeptical about putting them on their plate right now. And so we may change that. Because it seems like that might be more for the state university than it is for Sabina and Drake to take on. But we do see you know, there's a potential there, so I think, you know, we need to understand if we can do something like that. It didn't work last time, but it was a for-profit. And they're not doing well throughout the country anyway. But if there an opportunity for the state universities to take it on and maybe develop some certification programs that can help people that are coming out of the CTE centers that continue to upgrade their skills. We'll have that, I guess we'll continue to talk about that.
Having been in the public education system, particularly in tech ed, there are different variations of culinary programs at different tech centers. I'm not sure they're all consistent in how they're delivering what they're delivering. So that's certainly the future conversation.
Sure.
Next piece was something else that we are not necessarily involved with, which is connecting Vermont to New York, the transportation system.
Yeah, we'll have, I've talked to the chair of House Transportation. We'll be having a conversation with transportation as well.
Great. And then the final part here is the Reddit conversation.
If we're going to, with regard to the, connecting onto New York, is there a counterpart to your agency or somebody from New York that we should involve in this discussion?
Sure there is, but I would leave that to transportation to reach out to whomever they felt that would be the most appropriate counterpart. How would you like to address Reddit, Mike?
Well, we haven't had a walkthrough of it yet. Rick was unavailable, but, I mean, you can,
Sure.
we can all look at it at the same time, I guess.
All right. So currently, we started out with a $5 million out of funding to support primarily the economic development organizations that would like to further develop industrial parks or industrial property. It was at the time a loan or currently is a loan, not a grant. What this would do is it would turn the process into a grant as opposed to a loan. And currently, you would need to put in a deed if you were to purchase land. You would need to have in a deed a restriction on the property. Because if someone were to purchase that, money's going to come back because of the loan property. We would eliminate the deed component. We would turn it into a grant. And then there are a couple other pieces of this that would change. Right now, it's an 80-20 split where you can get 20% of, let's say, $1 million. You could get $200,000, but you need to bring $800,000 to the table. One of the reasons that all of that $5 million is not out right now is because of that there is a difficulty on the part of whether it's a RDC or another development corporation to come up with the 80%. We would like to change that to 50%. We believe it's important for people who are developing to have some skin in the game. And so we would like to have it be a 50-50. And another major change in this process is that federally impacted properties would benefit from this fund as well. And you'll see further near the end how that plays out. That we would change the program to a 50%, and I'm going all the way to, I guess it's page 13 of what I'm looking at, line 17. We would change the award to being the lesser of $1 million and 50% match to that. Federally impacted programs would be able to go to $2 million. And what this currently reads is that there would be no match required. We believe that there should be a match to that, again, skin in the game. So if you were to ask what recommendation we might have, changing that to 50% instead of 100% would be a recommendation. One of the reasons for that is that this fund will get used up pretty quickly and we do not have a source for additional funding. Currently, we have about $2.5 million left in the fund. And there are some federally impacted properties out there that would love to access this, and you probably know them already. They could pretty quickly use this fund up just with a couple different projects. And we are aware that if you changed it to a 50-50 split, there are other locations around the state of Vermont that have development corporations that would like to gain access to that. So Nick's leaning forward. I know you have a couple of comments.
Yeah, but
Okay. There's another piece to this that particularly around the federally impacted property, if we go to page 14, number 6, where it says there are 3 criteria for which a federally impacted property would benefit from this program, one of which is it would be in a designated downtown, it would be in a REAP zone, and that it would be, or it would be in a federally declared natural disaster area over from the last 2 years of declarations. A potential federally impacted property would need to have 2 of those 3. We would recommend that you allow us to look into or change the 2-year criteria for the disaster relief to at least a 3-year, because we want to make sure that that we don't run out the clock on the opportunity to use these funds.
And I think the intent was actually to look at like a 5-year period.
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand the sort of structure of the funding of the program. You said, I think you said you had 2.5 million left in for those purposes.
Correct.
But yeah, I was looking at some features of the program, the grant program and everything. That would be up pretty quickly, wouldn't it? I mean, if you have $1 million for the non-federally impacted and then 2 million or whatever for the federally impacted, well, the budget on it. So what's the history? I mean, are those what part of your annual appropriation, or is it one time? What's the sustainability of that fund?
Yeah, there was a one-time appropriation of $5 million, and I think it was 23, Nick, was it?
Okay.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And since then, we've had 3 different approved grants, one for $1 million, one for 220,000, another for 157,000, which kind of adds up to that 2.5 million that was already out the door. We are recognizing that there will be demand into the future.
Right.
And we also recognize that we have a federally impacted properties issue that we're trying to address. So we do not have, crux of it is we do not have a revenue source for this. And so, yes, we could very quickly use that up in the next 9 months. But we would be back to this table again in a following year saying, this really worked. And so we need X number of dollars based on the 3 applications that we got for this.
That would be a great thing.
I would also,
Yes.
I would also note that the original program with the deed restriction, that really made it hard for smaller RDCs to access the funding, especially with the 80-20 split. So getting rid of the deed restriction actually accomplishes 2 things. Because the deed restriction technically makes it a loan, and the Agency of Commerce and Community Development is not empowered to make loans. And 2, changing the split to 50-50 allows those smaller RDCs to access the program.
And someone out there is wondering, why are we doing this anyway? And the purpose of this is to increase the stock of commercial property. We have in industrial properties. We have old stock in the state of Vermont. And when people came to me at the RDC in Rutland, they said, I need overhead doors, 3-phase power, 20-foot ceilings. There's not a lot of that out there. And so the goal is to have RDCs and other development corporations be able to create that. At the same time, we're looking at issues around the state with federally impacted property. So wisely, somebody came up with the idea and said, well, why not putting this in here as well? And could we do something with, for example, Newport is here to talk about their downtown. Also right here in Montpelier, you know, there's an issue with the federal building, the former post office. There are probably other buildings out there as well. And so I would like us to think about where is the funding source in the future? We can solve some problems right now. But we will be creating an issue, which is we will have a program with no money. And I'm not here to ask you to put anything in this year, but potentially in the future, we would need to come back.
So we're sort of doing this a little bit out of order because we didn't talk about the original program and then the changes to it. So can you just, and I wrote myself a note to have Rick take us through it, but so right now it's a revolving loan fund or it's a grant program right now?
Right now, it is a loan. And so the development organization that comes in would need to come in with 80 cents on the dollar to access 20 cents. And that has been problematic because the organizations out there just don't have that available cash to come to the table to do projects. It is, that's why we'd like to make those changes. And there are a couple organizations that are out there that are big enough to be able to do that. It's the smaller organizations, as Nick was pointing out, that just don't have the access to capital to make that work. So we're trying to tweak the program enough so that it will actually be statewide and not just in a particular pocket within the state.
So it's originally designed as a $5 million revolving loan fund.
I would clarify that is that it is not a revolving loan fund in the sense where we're making term loans that are paid back to that specified time. The only thing that makes it a loan program is that there's a deed restriction that says if at some point in the future this is sold, then the principal is returned to the agency. So if they never sell the property or they sell it in 40 or 50 years, somebody who's not Lyle or I is going to be sitting there receiving a check going, where did this come from?
Okay, so it wasn't designed originally to be a fund that is
Right, when we
ongoing.
proposed
It
it
was designed
in the
as,
legislature originally, we
economic
wanted it to be a
development.
grant program. And then there was discussion within the session, and that was added in because there was feeling that the money, the principal needed to be returned, but the structure of it was a little strange. And it also, I don't think anybody realized that it made it a loan and that the agency isn't empowered to make loans. So this is
In
really.
fact, there was a percentage of interest that was going to be due of 2%, and we would have to figure that out down the road as well. Great idea to have it a perpetual fund, but there would be no perpetual fund because the money was going to go out. The RDCs were not going to sell the building anyway. So it was going to be in a deed and nothing was going to come out at the end of the day.
yeah, it had to be held in a different space, right? We have plenty of bodies across the state that can do loans.
Absolutely.
Somebody else could have held it if it was designed in a different, okay.
It is anxious to.
I'm thinking about it. Lots of thoughts, thank you.
And give more context to it because I think I was the only one. When we developed that program, we knew that the RDCs probably wouldn't be selling the property, so they wouldn't have to pay it back. But if they did sell the property, then the money could come back and then be used again. So that's why we did it that way. Make sure that the RDC at 20%. To help try to build some of these buildings that need to be put in their industrial parks. So
But again, it's a great concept. Even the cost of construction, as you've heard many people come in here and probably talk about, has made that, it precluded that.
So I think the language that we have here doesn't change anything with the 50% idea. What the change is looking at properties that are possibly in Shreveport and possibly in Montpelier to have them be able to access which funds at 100%. But the program itself, that 50% would still stay the same. And of course, turn it into a grant as well.
I'm gonna push back and argue a little bit to love Jeff, or Rick rather. He would love to have it be 100%. I would encourage us to think about having that be consistent with a 50% match of some kind.
And I'll argue back.
I'm not gonna argue back.
But what I can tell you is that Newport has been on the hook for the last 10 years, 11 years now, with a hole in the ground on Main Street that has gone nowhere. And if we have the opportunity, in my mind, to be able to help Newport purchase that property from the receiver so that, or Newport or another organization within Newport, to be able to purchase that property and turn it into something, then I think, in my mind, the state owes Newport that. Because this was an EB5 disaster that happened and was not on Governor Scott's watch, but it still falls on the state of Vermont, in my mind. So that's where I'm coming from.
As Mike knows, as a former graduate of North Country Union High School, I'm all in on Newport. And Rick knows that as well. Just our concern, my concern, is that fund will be depleted immediately.
Well, and if it is, I'm hoping that you also get applications in that will show us that changing that to a 50% grant will work, and that in next year's budget, some money can be put in there to fund those projects, because I think it'll work. I agree with you. I think that the RDCs and others, we can start building some commercial properties in our industrial parks that we can help bring in new business. I agree with that.
That $5 million is a pretty small bet. That you won't get to a lot of the artists. You won't see it moving around because of that scale that we're now dealing with. And while I like the idea of us having oversubscription implies that every program is popular, it also implies that the pot of money was rather small for the intended purposes. And if it means placing larger investments into our economic development infrastructure, I think that's a really good outcome, a really good idea. So hopefully we'll have that, whatever the number is, we know that the demand is greater than that. And that's, we have 5 million to play with, or 2.5 million to play with. There may be a tempered level of participation, is 3 or 4 and we're done. But my sense is, I think that since this conversation has been ongoing, you've been hearing from organizations, that the numbers were frustrating the barrier to entry. Whatever ultimately we get in applications, I think there's much more out there, and much more upside to more substantial investments.
And don't hear me saying that I would be disappointed if Ben is able to buy the post office and Rick is able to buy the pit. So those would be 2 wonderful outcomes.
To be clear on that thing, that's all. Say that.
I just want to mention that these percentages could go either way. I mean, maybe 10%, 90% grant, 10% skin in the game. It doesn't necessarily have to be 50-50. So I don't think we should leave anything off the table. Anything from 0 to 100.
And not to go down a different rabbit hole, but one of the reasons that we do need commercial property and industrial property is we have increasingly great relationships with Canada. And so there is a need, and your support of our $150,000 for a relationship with the Office of Canada is really important.
Sure. The questions for Laura? Commissioner, thank you.
Thank you very much for allowing me this much time.
Anytime.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Nice of you to say.
That's what I was gonna say.
Megan has to be somewhere by 11, and I want to make sure that she gets testified. So
That's
if I could have
Yeah.
Megan and then.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I was gonna say, sounds like you can have her say.
You're like, I'm not getting up my chair.
I'm here for the duration. Good morning.
Good morning.
For the record, Megan Sullivan, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. And so exciting this morning that I'm testifying about economic development in here. And then I'm going across the hall to testify about economic development in energy. So it's like Christmas for the Vermont Chamber today, and then tomorrow is Manufacturing Day. So it's a good day. Thank you for having me. We're really excited to see, a great economic development bill and vehicle moving and to start digging into that in this committee. I sent Jonathan our priorities that we had set out at the beginning of the session. And I sort of was thinking like, do I just want to have comments on this bill? Should I talk about our priorities? Obviously things, we're months in, so priorities that started at the beginning of the session shift greatly. But I thought I do want to sort of talk about what we came into this session thinking about and where this bill is currently really well aligned, where there are good things happening and where there could also be additional opportunities for conversation. And where we came in at the beginning of the session was looking at three different things we had going on. One was the annual business climate survey and most of these are through the Vermont Futures Project, which is the foundation of the Vermont Chamber. The business climate survey, where we reach out to businesses across the state and get a feel for, how are things going? How are you feeling about doing business in Vermont? What are the areas that you're most concerned with? What are the biggest opportunities? And I would say the feeling on the ground was sort of middling, right? It was about a 2.8% out of 5. What's your general feeling? So folks, aren't feeling great, but it's not like this is the worst economic situation that they're feeling across the state. And their, top concerns were around workforce, non-surprising, permitting and taxation, regulatory environment, housing. So nothing too surprising there either, but it was sort of a good litmus test of where are we focusing our energy. And then I think getting into this report that's in this bill, how are you feeling like you're being heard in Montpelier? Are you feeling like people understand the economics that you're facing in the building and are sort of responsive to say, how are we going to help you be successful? Not great results there. And I think part of that, because we're here every day and we see the programs that you all are creating that are intended to be helping businesses, helping the workforce. And I think they don't always make it outside these very thick stone walls, right? Do the good work. And it's something that we've been talking about for years in our testimony. And we've been calling it, we got to elevate our achievements. Like we've done these things. And then if they sit 4 pages down on a website, on an agency, even if people are using their devices, it's not just about, are we communicating it? And I think this is where that, we don't have to use the term marketing if that implies a budget. But how are we communicating it? Are we communicating in a way that meets people where they are to say like, not only is this program here, but here is how you can use it for retention. Here's how you can use it for recruitment. How are we using language that meets people where they are? That's not, again, 4 pages down government speak or regulation. It's really about saying, what is the customer service we're providing to ensure that these programs are used as intended. So the other piece that the Futures Project has done is obviously the economic action plan. We did not bring copies of it today because at this point I may have provided like 3 or 4 copies, but I can bring more copies. Certainly if the committee would like a refresher on that, and would encourage you to have Kevin Schuman to sort of talk about all the different things the Futures Project is working on. But that's really to say like, where are we at now? And then what is a way that we can build sort of that economy of the future that brings all Vermonters together and moving from sort of a scarcity to an abundance mindset. And then the last piece is a competitiveness dashboard that the Futures Project put together to say, how are we faring competitiveness wise with other states? Where do we rank? And there were some places where we ranked well, right? We are one of the most progressive states in how our tax system is set up. Some areas we're not doing this well. We're 51st out of 50 states. I mean, that's brutal in economic momentum. So, there's only up, which is great, right? That's the opportunity. And we're 7th in our regulatory environment. So we're really thinking about that and like, okay, before we add, and this gets to our first priority, before we add to our regulatory environment, can we have an understanding of where we are? And can we ask our agencies that are sort of our regulatory bodies that are enforcing, it's great we have a one-stop shop where someone can say, okay, what are all the permits we need? But as a state, do we have a handle on what that is? On how many different regulations we're asking people to go through? Is there duplication where you're having to get a permit? And we certainly see this in housing, but I think our employers are saying they're feeling it too, where I'm going to 3 different places for the same thing and everyone wants cut. And then there's some where it's like, well, they want me to do it this way and they want me to do it this way and no one's talking to each other. And I think that's where the frustration is. So one of our first priorities was, can we really get a report on what's going on here? And here we talk about agencies taking it on. It's also something Vermont Chambers is working on taking on. There is a consultant who works nationally and has done this in other states like Colorado, who is doing a deep dive into what is the regulatory environment at the state level, at the local level, and focusing on specific industries to really try and figure out, like, it's not anti-regulation, it's not we shouldn't regulate, but it's saying where are those pinch points where there may be multiple agencies who are overseeing the same thing, and what is the cost of all of that? So that's something that we are looking to do, and as we get that off the ground, we'd love to make sure that there's funding. We want it to be useful. We're looking at housing, healthcare, manufacturing as some of the industries that we're going to start on there. There's additional opportunities for that. So happy to answer questions on what we're looking at there.
I was just curious, getting back to the whole sort of the referral type stuff.
Yeah.
Is that a common thing you have? Is people call you and say, hey, I want to start a business. Where do I start? Is that something you commonly see at the Vermont Chamber, or is it more people that have already kind of established themselves?
We get that a little bit. We'll get someone who wants to start a business or someone from out of state who's thinking about moving to Vermont and wants to know who they should be talking to. And we can make, those referrals, and it's sort of that institutional knowledge that we have, right? Of like, well, Megan's been working in economic development for 20 years. So, Amy's been doing it. And so our team is looking to us to put that together. And I think what we see the need for it is not just to say the SBDC is a resource, but to know that whether someone goes to the Vermont Chamber, or they go to the SBDC, or they go to the Center for Women in Enterprise, or they go to the town manager, that all of those folks have been given this information about, hey, did you know that the federal government just passed a tax credit for businesses that invest in childcare? So you're thinking about childcare and about, what the state's done, but here's another opportunity where you can invest and get a tax credit for it. And sort of how are we packaging all of those things where it's, as Representative Granning mentioned, like we're a small state. We need to think innovatively about the tools in our toolbox, because veggie works for some companies, not everybody, a lot of people. Training program works for some companies, but not everybody. But we are doing things that can be used as recruitment and retention. And how are we telling not only the businesses, but the different organizations that support them, that say, make sure when you're getting those incoming calls, here's hear that resource piece. So that whoever your trusted person is, right? In some cases, it's the RDC, some cases it's somebody different, but we're sort of disseminating that information in a way that reaches people where they are. So it's not just sort of a bottom up, like, let's make sure one group has the information, you should go to the SBDC, but also does the SBDC, those 12 counselors know what's coming through this building? Do they know the workforce development opportunities that are being invested in? Do they know the housing, right? Like, if the employers we're talking to are really trying to figure out, I'm losing employees because they can't access housing. Okay, do you know about these tools that you can talk to your employees about for a down payment assistance fund? You know, for employers that are saying, I think I'm just gonna build housing, like, okay, well, there's some challenges to being an employer and a landlord, but do you know about the rental revolving loan fund where you can invest in housing that can be built in your community, which will help your employees indirectly without them coming. So, you know, we, in our newsletter, we put out here are 10 new tools that you can use for recruitment and retention, which is great for our members to read our newsletter, but I think a little more concerted effort in that report of getting a handle of, you know, I think Representative Duke, to your question, what are the resources? As a small state, our hope at the chamber is that is really thought about in a broad way, in sort of that recognition. We're a small state. We do have resources. They're not all sort of the traditional economic development resources, but thinking about all of those things. And if we don't want to call it marketing, how do we creatively and innovatively communicate those so it's reaching people where they are? Which sort of, so the next piece is really about the workforce investments. But I would say that this report goes broader than that, and I love that. So number 2, yeah, sort of check.
But I think, you know, how do we cross-train,
Yeah,
right? So how do we cross-train in the training program? So that if an employer has other questions, so anybody that's working the training program, we could say, oh, you can go here, you can go Department of Labor for this, or same thing with Department of Labor. You can go over here to ACCD. Veggie, if there's some applications for Veggie, and there's some issues that they're having for finding out where they can get workforce help. Send them over to Department of Labor. And then how do we get that, push that down into the municipality?
Just to add to that, I think and something that I feel like you're bringing up is the diversity of concerns for business owners is exacerbated over time.
right.
So work becomes this kind of other catch-all, like community resource for things like healthcare, for housing, for childcare, education, all of these things. So I think you're bringing up a lot of really good points. And I grateful that you are.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity, right, to really start thinking broadly about those resources, because we have limited resources, we have limited funds in the state. And so the things that we are investing in, if we can be thinking innovatively about how we communicate them, how we talk about them, you know, and I would include transportation in that as well, as a struggle employers and employees are facing. I think it's an important piece. We're happy to be part of the conversation. It's thinking about that. The Leighton Great Green Mountain Trust Program, I would put in the bucket of one of those programs that it didn't make it into the governor's budget. It's not something that we understand the university has capacity to continue. So we're sort of willing to see it go away, as opposed to expansion of it. Oh, God, it's like I set you up for that question. Yes, that making the point. This was a program that you all invested in or 4 years ago, that a graduate from a Vermont State College with a bachelor's or above would be able to, an employer that hired would have access to a reimbursement. So an employee could get $5,000 off of their loans for working for a Vermont employer. We really push this as a recruitment tool for businesses. We do a lot for students. A lot of, loan repayments for high need industries, which are phenomenal, and those are really student focused. I really thought of this as a business focused, like this is a tool for businesses to recruit graduates. Because you could say in your marketing, come work for us and we'll help $5,000 off. And maybe, it's a chance to say like, this is a great matching opportunity, like we'll get $5,000, through this state program and we'll do another $5,000 on top of it. And all of a sudden this young person who's saying like, oh, cost of living in Vermont is high, wages aren't as high, all of a sudden that's a meaningful package that can compete with other states. There was money in this program for a while because nobody knew about it, right? Like it was living at UVM and students are their focus. Employers, aren't their focus, rightfully so. They've got a big job to do with the students. And it was, I think, a missed opportunity for folks. And we tried to push it out again in our newsletter saying like, this is a recruitment tool. You should be using this to recruit people. But whether it's legislators or business owners or state officials, we're saying, what is that program? And I think that's an example of like, here's a really good program that you all invested in and put money in for a really specific purpose. Lived on a website and nobody knew about it. And it was a missed opportunity. Now the money is now gone because it got a push this year. But I think that's the example. And I'm sad that it is likely going away for now.
This is kind of that example makes me wonder about sort of the civic user experience in Vermont. And this question about how we're messaging, how we're able to the word out, how we're able to communicate to people all of the good services that we seem to have. I guess that brings me to the issue also, or one problem with having so many different communication channels. And as organizations that are kind of hubs for this information, how exactly we can disseminate out or create trusted channels that we know Vermonters will come to, so that we're not having to spend it out over like, 5 different social media.
Right.
Yeah.
I think those are important questions of how we do that. And I think if organizations are getting helpful information and it's, I don't want to say branded in a way, but it's provided in a way where it's not like, if I get something, I'm like, well, I gotta do a little pretty enough. I'm gonna have to judge this if we're gonna send it out.
Yeah.
Then maybe it changes something, but if it's prejudged and Agency of Commerce are expert judges, I will say, and look at how they represent Vermont as a place to visit. I think there's great opportunity there. And it is going to take some interagency working because these programs live in different places.
Yes.
But I think it's an opportunity to say how we're really communicating vast majority. I'm hoping this CPACE, this energy efficiency financing tool that I'm going to go testify about across the hall, if that gets passed, that's going to be a great new financing tool for modernizing industrial and commercial and affordable housing projects. And that one I'm already like, all right, how are we going to tell people about it? Assuming it's passed, we'll be supportive. Veggie. We've talked about veggie in this over the years. I think, it is a bit of a self-regulating program, right? Like when it's tough to find employees, you don't necessarily see as much uptake of it. But that doesn't mean we should shut it off because it is self-regulating, right? People that are applying for it are doing so because they have a confidence they can grow in Vermont. And if they don't meet their targets, they don't receive the incentive. And it is really important for the businesses that have used it. Think of Beta Technologies. This was a key piece for them in Vermont. And I think part of the challenge around having that next conversation is when folks are always fighting about, will it end this year? The fight for folks to see this as a really important tool in the toolbox has to be about how do we preserve this incentive tool that we have. And if we can say, like, we have this, and it's going to work for some types of businesses and it's going to work really well for them, let's stop arguing about whether it sunsets at the end of this year or not. That can really open up a fuller dialogue. And then what do we need for times like right now, where employment is low, where demographics are challenging? And I think we would love to see that conversation happen. It was part of what came out of the policy retreats that we had this fall, and where we've seen some companies who have been able to grow through automation, through saying, you know, our workforce is getting older and the manual input that it takes is more challenging. And automation allows those folks to stay here longer, to upskill. And we see the stories nationally where automation can lead to job loss. I think in Vermont, what we see automation lead to is job preservation, business investment and growth. And so how we can look at supporting that is a really important question. And it's important for especially our manufacturing sector right now to be thinking about how we do that in a way that understands. All right, then. Sorry. In a way that
Very sorry.
That's okay.
I'm getting great feedback on this.
that meets our manufacturers where they are right now, because we're seeing some scary numbers. We'll talk more about what those numbers are looking like tomorrow, but I think there is a pressing need to figure out how we support manufacturing stability and growth in Vermont that meets the time. And so we have a proposal in here about some of the folks that should be at the table. We know that the treasurer has this 10% for Vermont Fund, which is for housing and economic development. And there may be ways to do this that are different, right? I think manufacturers are a little bit less averse to debt. But if we can make that or low interest debt, there's opportunities there that recognize our financial constraints in the state. So we have a proposal here. Happy to talk more about what that is. Or if that to be incorporated into the report that's coming, or if that's sort of a separate report with a different stakeholder group that obviously includes the agency. That's what we're thinking. Culinary Institute. We totally understand, you know, where the committee is coming from with the amount of work that the Office of Workforce has on their plate. We do see this as really important for our hospitality industry. Restaurants have been talking to us for years as the Vermont Independent Restaurant Group about the workforce challenges that they have seen since NEFI closed. And the CTE directors of culinary arts have been talking to us about their students either have to go out of state, and there are programs out of state that offer in-state tuition to those students. And that's really hard to get them back. It's brilliant by those other states. Or the equity question of the students that can't afford to go out of state because they need to live at home don't have that option. So the students that can afford can go to that next level of training in culinary arts. Students that can't afford it don't have options. So if there is an opportunity to get to that next level of training in Vermont, we'd love to participate in that conversation.
So Green Mountain Job is a program that I've gotten a lot of different feedback on, mixed feedback, more students graduating from University of Vermont, staying in Vermont. This, the last couple of years, they're finally gathering data. People are very excited about it. We're not funding it anymore this year, right? Like and we've added money, maybe it'll stay in the budget for Freedom and Unity, right? Which is, so you don't have loans after. So it's really hard to know. It's almost like we have misaligned almost incentives, right? Or maybe we're looking at two different things, or maybe it's the same thing. I'm not sure. Again, thinking out loud. We want more of our kids to have access to education. So we don't want them to be burdened with the debt. We also want these kids to stay in Vermont.
Yeah.
And so is there a way to incentivize both, right? And that's really like the thinking that I'm trying to kind of bring in here, because, getting an education, yes, we want that. And we want you to stay. And right now, and so Green Mountain Jobs did that more than Freedom and Unity, maybe. But is there I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm just putting that out there as let's keep thinking about this and let's figure out how we incentivize more Ed Bar kids to stay.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the frame. For me, the Green Mountain Jobs, obviously it's about the student because they're getting the longer payment, but the focus of that program was on the business. This was about being able to, for business, in my Chamber of Commerce, that tool was about giving a business a tool to recruit college graduates to stay and work for them instead of going out of state. As opposed to the framing being, here's how we support the student with their loans. And so maybe it's looking at Freedom and Unity as that second framing too, of like, okay, well, what is, if we're going to make this an economic development tool, not just a student tool, how do we frame it that way? And so I would say for me, the Green Mountain Jobs success is about that employer who's able to access a recent graduate that maybe they wouldn't have been compete for without being able to use that tool. So, but happy to thinking more about how we that innovatively, how do we use our programs as economic development tools.
And where do we house? Because I think that's
Yes.
another important.
It is.
Good.
Great, thank you for having me.
And I know you have it here as well, if you want. Go on down and then.
Be happy to. Is there any chance that John Copans and I can kind of co-present?
Sure.
Jonathan, I was trying to pull up my slides on Zoom should we do that or can you share the slides?
You should do the slides first, and if you can't, I can try it, but okay, I can make you a problem.
It's great. I can try to
Sit up here with them too, if you want.
Okay, wait, I want to try to figure it out in case. Yeah, that's.
He's gonna come up and join you.
Yeah, I'm just trying to help with the slides too, so that. Goes.
Sorry, thanks for your patience. I work for a historic preservation organization, so technology sometimes is building a bridge to the 19th century. John, I think I got it.
Okay. There, but from the grace of God, go ahead.
The tech stuff is always anxiety points.
What's that?
Any kind of thing like this, the tech stuff is always my anxiety. Point. It won't. Things.
Well, you know, the device knows that you're anxious, you know.
Yeah. Now, in the day of AI, it definitely knows. It's taking advantage of it.
I celebrate every time I actually post a Zoom meeting. That's the way and it all works. I got that.
Yeah.
I think I just got it.
You got it.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry. Can share my slides?
Yeah, your co-host, you should be able to.
Thank you. Thank you. Apologize for that. Thanks so much for having us. My name is Ben Doyle. I'm the president of the Preservation Trust of Vermont. I think I've met with you before about various issues. In this capacity, I'm representing the Preservation Trust of Vermont, but I also serve on the board of the Foundation for Resilient Montpelier. I happen to also be a member of the City Council here in Montpelier. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, and I'm John Copans. I am the executive director of Foundation for Resilient.
So what we're here today to talk about is this morning, you were talking about the RIDIP program and some changes related to that program that could potentially help support the redevelopment of federally impacted properties. And that's, I think, the most important thing to define right off the bat is what is a federally impacted property? We're suggesting that federally impacted property is some kind of property in Vermont that has been significantly adversely impacted by either government action or in many cases government inaction. You know, federal properties either owned by the General Services Administration or by a federal receiver play an outsized role in a number of our kind of downtown communities. And the redevelopment of those properties, particularly as the federal government frankly recedes from economic development at the state and local level, becomes enormously challenging. And so what are needed are kind of new tools to help spur that redevelopment. I'm going to very quickly specifically talk about 87 State Street, which is the federal building in Montpelier, the former post office. But I really want to emphasize that we're using this as kind of an example, this is a unique situation, but I fear that it's going to become a more common one. And that's why it's important to have the kind of tools ready at our disposal. So I'm going to talk about maybe the history of this site a little bit. And then John's going to talk about at the Montpelier Foundation for Resilient Montpelier, the work that we've done to try and move a redevelopment of this project forward. So this is the, believe it or not, this is the original post office in Montpelier.
It's not changing the screen.
It's not changing on the screen. Shoot. Perfect.
There you go.
It's a touch screen. There we go.
Just gonna do this, if that's okay. Can you guys see that all right?
Yeah.
This is the original post office in Montpelier. This was built in 1891, Romanesque style by a local architect. Again, it was christened in 1891, and at the time, the Watchman, which was the local Central Vermont newspaper, said that this, with the exclusion of this building that we're sitting in now, was the finest public building in Vermont. So this was a customs house, post office, for many years. Here's another iteration of it. As you can tell, it really was an incredible gem. In 1962, progress marches on. It was decided that this building was no longer sufficient for the needs of Montpelier for the state. And so this building was commissioned, designed by Julian Goodrich, a local architect in the modernist style. Does have echoes of the kind of classical columns, but clearly a very different style. Was completed in 1964, as you can see here. And this was envisioned as both a post office, a courthouse. There was a federal courthouse on the top floor, and then numerous federal agencies worked in this building as well. Full disclosure, I'm formerly the Assistant State Director at USDA Rural Development. I worked in this building for a number of years. Nothing ever happened to me, but it's important to know that literally hundreds of federal workers worked at this building. You know, when I worked at USDA, we had 54 employees between the two jurisdictions of Vermont and New Hampshire. Now there are 12. None of them work in this building. Federal Highway Administration is in this building. Small Business Administration was in this building. Courthouse was in this building. Post Office was in this building. It's a huge economic engine for downtown Montpelier. And most importantly, I believe, signaled federal engagement in our community and in our state. You know, it was important for the federal government to be anchored in the capital of the state of Vermont. And yeah, and so when you see this was dedicated under Phil Hawke's administration, talking about that it was actually the symbol. It says a quote here from Governor Hawke: "Government rose almost before our eyes with the construction of this building." Here's a more recent photo of the building. And then, as all of you know, in 2023, Montpelier experienced a devastating flood, as did much of Vermont. This is a kind of overhead shot of the city. And you can see the federal building right here, right? This is the parking lots along Port Street, Steakhouse Sikorsky over here. This is actually a photo that I took the morning after the flood on Port Street. You can see that the building was completely inundated. There's, it's important to know there was about 4 feet of water on the first floor of this building. Of course, there are basements, right? So those areas were completely inundated, about 4 feet of water on the first floor. Here's another iteration of rendering. In December of 2024, the federal government, this building is owned by General Services Administration that manages properties for the federal government. They announced that they were going to dispose of this property after already having done some remediation to the building. You know, frankly, we don't know how much they invested in this property to stabilize it, but we can surmise that it was significant. They completely remediated. Bottom, they put back the utilities, the heating systems, everything was reinvested in this building, presumably with the intent to return federal workers and the post office to this building. They chose ultimately not to, and to dispose of the building. And maybe from there, John, I'll let you take it.
Do you mind advancing the slide?
Sure.
Thanks, Ben. So let me just give you some context about sort of who I work for, Foundation for Resilient Montpelier. You've seen pictures of the flood. You all are familiar with what the city experienced. Coming out of the flood, we formed an organization in this city that's not part of the municipality, but works very closely with the municipality. At the time, it was called the Montpelier Commission for Recovery and Resilience. They hired me as the executive director in March of 2024. And the idea around this organization was that it was singularly focused on the recovery and resilience of this city. And it had a 2-year charge to do that work here in Montpelier. In December of 2024, the federal government decided they were going to dispose of this building. And for lack of another entity in this city or in the state to step forward and really consider what was going to happen to this pivotal property, we stepped in to play a role in really thinking about redevelopment of the property. And that included really engaging stakeholders and trying to marshal all of the forces we could and can to really think together about what is the future of this piece of property. And so the way the GSA process works is that before a building like this that they are disposing of goes to public auction, there is something called a negotiated sale, and that's really a misnomer, but the idea is that the either the municipality itself or the state has an opportunity to purchase this building for a public benefit before it goes to public auction. The advice we got, and in fact, we quickly raised about $50,000 in private funds, hired two excellent real estate consultants by the name of Jeffrey Glassberg and Samantha Dunn. And part of what we quickly came to understand was that we really needed to use this negotiated sale process essentially to do due diligence and understand what are the opportunities and challenges with redeveloping this building. And so one of the things we did is actually we came over here last session. We worked successfully both on the House side and the Senate side to get a $100,000 appropriation to Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission to supplement that $50,000 that we had raised privately. And essentially we used the last year to do due diligence to really understand what the opportunities and challenges are with this building. One of our goals, right, we're very focused on the resilience of downtown Montpelier. Montpelier lies at the confluence of the North Branch and the main branch of the Winooski. The truth is our downtown is tremendously vulnerable. So is our Capitol complex, as you know. So what one of our goals is to increasingly add to the portfolio of properties that can withstand a future flooding event. And that is really one of our goals with this property here at the Federal Building. A couple of statistics about it. It's got about 50,000 square feet of usable space. It sits on 1.6 acres of property. And when you think about it's basically equidistant from right here at the State House and sort of the core of a downtown at State and Main Street. I mean, you all probably walk by this building on a daily basis. We think it has tremendous significance, not just for downtown Montpelier and the vitality of downtown Montpelier, but also very much in terms of its proximity to the Capitol complex as well, right? What we don't want and what we fear as a community is a building sitting stagnant for decades. And we think that's a very real and serious possibility. And that's why we're taking this proactive approach of really thinking about redevelopment. So our goals are two. One is to really reactivate the building itself. Essentially, it is a building that it has a ton of interior space. It's not a great candidate, and this is part of the analysis we did with due diligence. It's not a great candidate for turning into housing because it's got all of that interior space. So really it is suited as commercial space. So our hope and intention is to reactivate it as commercial space. But then on the balance of the parcel, our analysis shows that we can fit about 70 to 80 units of housing on the back parcel. And so in fact, we've already engaged Vermont Housing and Conservation Board in a conversation. They are reactivating something called a land bank. And in part, they're doing that with the hope, I wouldn't say quite the intention, but the hope is we would be able to essentially carve out the back portion of the parcel to add 70 units of housing right here in downtown Montpelier. Again, that is something that is not just a city priority, but I would argue a regional and state priority as well in terms of adding housing. A couple of other things to mention. One is that due diligence process allowed us to better understand some of the environmental challenges of the building. In fact, we hired a local firm that coincidentally, and this was a really lucky coincidence for us, fortunately, they had a subcontractor who had already been in the building on behalf of GSA, and they had already done a report for GSA. If we did not know that fact, we wouldn't have asked for that report. Sadly, what that report shows is there's a pretty significant level of PCB contamination in this building. So that's one of the other wrinkles. That never would have come to light if we hadn't been able to use that due diligence time and worked with an environmental consultant, again, with the use of state code to do that. So at this point, GSA offered to sell us the building for $2.4 million. When I say us, it was really the Agency of Commerce and Community Development that raised their hand to say they were interested in negotiating. we don't think 2.4 million, given the environmental contamination, this did not make any sense financially. And so essentially, when we were no longer interested in negotiating at that level, and frankly, GSAC showed no indication that they were willing to negotiate off of that 2.4 million. They essentially have brought the negotiated sale portion of the process to a close, which means that the building is headed to auction, likely on the spring or summer timeframe. We are doing two things at this point as we prepare for that scenario. One is we are actively recruiting people to form what's called a local development corporation, because that is essentially the vehicle designated in state statute by which we redevelop properties like this. There are many examples. All of our RDCs are actually already local development corporations, but there are also examples where other local development corporations are formed for the explicit purpose of redeveloping property. We've had very productive conversations with a number of entities about forming the board of that local development corporation, and the function of that LDC will be to acquire the property and then to carry it through a redevelopment process. And so when we talk here today about this RIDP program, we, I think, really want to impart upon you all why we believe this is vital for the future of our city of Montpelier. And not just that, but also for the capital city here.
Yeah, and I would just say, one point I really kind of want to bring home is that, we believe that the changes to the RIDF program in general, from an economic development point of view, are good ones, right? To see greater uptick in the program and not have capital like just sit there and not be deployed. But we believe that the kind of federal set aside or federal criteria are required given the extraordinary circumstances that we're dealing with. I mean, the reality is, not to put too fine a point on it, is that the federal government has left a giant burning dumpster fire in our downtown and just said it's an as is where is sale. Good luck, right? And that's just unacceptable. And we at the local level have done really everything that we can. We've been working on this like 3 years now, trying to make something happen. But the reality is we need public investment and we need the state to provide the opportunity to do that. We know that in the previous legislative session, there has been a fund set aside to mitigate federal cuts and impacts. We believe that this is one such instance, but in this moment, there's capital sitting there in the fund right now that we think needs to be quickly deployed. And similarly for our partners in Newport, it's a similar situation in which the actions of the federal receiver really have left Newport in a lurch for over a decade at this point. And, Montpelier, Newport, these are critical downtowns in the state of Vermont that require, frankly, a fair shake to be able to kind of to move forward. And that's really what we're asking for. And to John's point, the fact that we were able to do this due diligence with the support of the legislature and discover that there is significant environmental contamination that GSA won't even let us into the building to categorize, that means that there's no private market solution here. No one, right? No responsible investor is going to purchase a building without being able to have an opportunity to understand the environmental contamination. We would be willing to go out to corporate partners, community, and say, we want to raise capital to buy this building. We can't do that in good conscience without having it kind of categorized. By putting it in the ownership of an LDC model and doing the purchase in this way, we're providing the ownership structure that allows us to do that brownfield categorization and have access to funding through the brownfields program that can really help make this development happen. And I'm looking at Representative Cooper here, like the way that I've been thinking about this is our Putnam Block moment, right? This is the Brooks House moment for Montpelier. It's that kind of all hands on deck moment that is going to be required to move this forward. And we believe, really, after years of looking at it, that this is the best tool available to us to get this ball rolling. And, I really respect my colleague, Lyle. I just want to say Lyle. It's like, my good friend Lyle, I totally appreciate the idea of wanting to have a match and skin in the game. I need you to know we have skin in the game, right? And this is going to take a redevelopment of this size is going to take literally tens of millions of dollars. right? What we need is our foot in the door to be able to get acquisition to really make a run at that redevelopment.
So I wanted to ask, 'cause I know that you've done all this homework already, so this will help me just catch up. The federal government must have to conform to. So it's, let me, I mean, wow, they don't have to worry about like circle stuff, they can sell a containment building.
Yeah.
They don't have that obligation as a, the federal does not have an obligation.
They have literally said there's nothing in the law that prevents us from selling to the building.
Do you know if he feels the exact same way?
We have worked with the Attorney General's office, we've worked with
DEC as
yeah,
well.
DEC, we have really.
We will engage the building in the umbrella program, like we're doing all of the steps to deal with after the fact, but the really, in any commercial real estate transaction, you're gonna have the opportunity to inspect and to characterize contamination. This is not a conventional real estate transaction because it's the federal government.
Which was the, so I know the GSA is in this right now. Was it the postals, USPS's, which federal entity had the building?
GSA has always owned the building.
Owned it.
Postal Service was just a tenant or really a leased space in the building. As did Federal Highway Administration, Small Business Administration.
So I really appreciate the thinking right behind this, the planning behind this, the desire to ensure that Montpelier doesn't end up with, you know, buildings that are closed off, right, boarded up, all of, I think that's incredibly important. And without understanding the cost, this feels really financially scary, red flaggy. I don't know how to characterize it. I don't have the words for it. And I'm just, you know, how do we make sure that we aren't supporting a project, right? That is, and maybe it's not we, maybe it's we. But like, what is, you know, what happened? How do we do that?
That's really appreciate that question. You know, as John, I like to think of this optimistically of like, there's an enormous opportunity here to redefine the economic engine of downtown Montpelier with housing, right? And flood resilient housing. So like, there's this optimistic vision behind this that it feels great. On the other hand, what we're really trying to avoid, as John said, is to see this go to auction and an undercapitalized speculative investor purchase this building and then be handcuffed to do anything with it for decades. Like, we could walk within 5 blocks of this building and I could show you a half a dozen buildings that are sitting vacant because of undercapitalized speculative investors in this community. To answer your question, the only way a responsible redevelopment of this site is going to happen, I believe, is through this LDC structure with a public-private partnership. That there has to be, even if a private investor comes in and purchases the building at auction, they're still going to want access to the financing available through VITA that an LDC structure provides, or access to brownfields funding, or the fact that if it's owned by an LDC, it doesn't have to pay property tax during the redevelopment. Like, there are all these economic development tools that will be available as a result of this investment. I hear you, it is scary. But it's the point is, this is where, and this is a philosophical thing, right? But this is where the federal government has failed us. And this is where the local government does not have the capacity to step in. And so that it really falls to the state to make this initial investment. I believe that we can take 2 years to put together the development group that can move this forward. And we're talking to Downstreet, to Evernorth, to all of the partners on the LDCs. Like, I think that there's the opportunity to do it, but it starts with site control and remediation. And that's what this investment would allow to happen.
The other point I would make is that, in fact, you know, our environmental consultant is giving us a range for cleaning up the DCBs. That range is somewhere between 1.1 and $3 million. That's a lot of uncertainty when you're going in, if you're a private purchaser of a piece of real estate, right? But we actually, you know, we've gone through the pro forma exercise of considering, okay, if it's 3 million, what are the public sources for doing the cleanup of that contamination? And then what are the other investments we need to make the building more resilient? So in fact, we are we do have a better sense of what the costs are when it comes to what redevelopment. This is really, what we're talking about here is the first piece, which is acquisition, so that we have site control, because without site control, we can't start on that remediation path. And then the second piece is some holding costs, because the truth is, a building like that needs to be looked after, it needs to be cared for. We don't want to simply have money for acquisition. We really have to have money to hold the building for a few years as we kick this into gear.
And I appreciate that complete planning, right? Because personally, after the flooding, I understood why Montpelier needed to rebuild where it was. And all of the red flags of how do we afford to maintain Montpelier where it is in perpetuity, because we know it's going to flood again, right? And so like we're in a lot of conundrums.
Well, and I might say we're answering that exact question related to the Capitol complex.
Yep.
Think about the millions of dollars of damage to the pavilion and other buildings in the Capitol complex. So in fact, BJS has charted a course there. They're still working with FEMA, but like you can make these buildings that are vulnerable to flooding, resilient to flooding. That is possible. And in fact, that's our vision for the future of this city. And 87 State Street, the former post office, is one of the places where we really want to do that work.
And just to get real like technical on it, these are, the original drawings of the building. We've actually, we've contracted with architects through the Regional Planning Commission to actually do what would it take to mitigate this building against future flooding. This first story is actually about a 20-foot ceiling. And so you could actually elevate the floor to a foot above flood stage, right? And then kind of change the entryway so that you actually could make this building, when you look at the transit center here in Montpelier that has affordable housing above, that building wasn't damaged, right? It was built in such a way that it was flood resilient. We believe that this building could be mitigated to do that. And then when you look at this, and this is just massing, right? This isn't really what it's going to look like. But this contemplates 2 decks of parking down below, so that in the future, if it were to flood, it would be a mess and you'd wash it out. But the point is that you would have the housing that was up above would be flood resilient and those people would be safe.
It's easier to replace a car than a building.
Exactly. Yeah. Or a home.
This whole discussion is also making me sit here and think about if this is an issue about publicly owned buildings, both federal or local or state owned buildings. So it also is tiptoeing into the education conversation and the potential for towns, cities and municipalities to be on the hook for a variety of publicly owned buildings. I'm wondering what kind of forward moving plan we have to help towns mitigate these issues.
Will this be publicly owned? The LDD segment of housing to grant this impacts and this isn't taking it.
That's also part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think, our involvement is to try and ensure that something actually does happen. And by having an LDC with a board of directors from local institutions and local partners help shape a public benefit, and we primarily see that really as the housing component we feel is the #1 public benefit. But to answer your question around the tax base, absolutely, Montpelier has a stagnant tax base and has for a very long time, right? And again, we believe that building in our downtown core where we already have infrastructure in proximity to the to state government is a way to increase economic vitality and ultimately the tax base. I mean, right now, the federal government is not paying taxes on that building, right? If we were able to get it into privately held hands, put it on the tax rolls, that would be a benefit for everyone.
The PCB is very concerning. We're going through that issue in Newport with North Country High School. And we're at a point where I think the state has invested $8 million in to try to remediate it and it's not working. And now we found it's in the ground as well. And I don't know how in-depth your report is that you received from GSA, but we're at a point where we have to tear it down and rebuild on another piece of property. And so it's concerning of, just a 1 to $3 million remediation. I'm just wondering how bad the PCBs really are, and would you have to take the building down, or would you just build on property?
Well, and so step one is it'll cost about $150,000 to fully characterize the PCBs. There will be a decision point for the LDC at that point, because then we will know much more clearly what the remediation costs are. It's entirely possible that they look at the economics of actual remediation and they say, you know what? It's more viable in terms of what happens with this parcel to actually demolish and remove that material. So like, we don't want to get over our skis in terms of, the key is we have to take ownership to fully characterize the contamination and make some hard decisions at that.
I guess from our experience at North Country, there's no way to remediate PCBs. We've done a whole bunch of different things, painting and trying to seal it, and it doesn't work. And where are we at? Big parking lot?
And some of the other drawings we've got actually show the massing we see here. You take that building out and then, it creates another opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? Yes, it's a challenge, but it's also another opportunity, because frankly, turning that into a green field as opposed to a brown field, that could actually be advantageous in terms of larger public benefit.
I've been sort of cheered by Bennington to Armory. That was Bennington transferred into municipal sort of ownership. Did undergo some PCB remediation, and it was that mix of paints, et cetera, and agreeing on what an appropriate level is now that we're in the 21st century, and we had to go to the 20th century to get there, and that means these things are and let's be careful about where we put the picture. That nature to dealing with the seals and the paint. But what I wanted to hear a little bit more about, if I could, is what the timeline is for when you would need to have what we're discussing now, that sort of capital deployed to do what? And would you have to have that by this time of year, that time of year? And the reason I want to mention all that is that I'm thinking back to the Putnam block in 2014, with a little bit of leftover brownfields money, the town submitted a area-wide plan. That was something that existed within that sort of brownfield EPA sphere to get a sense of what do people want to see, that public process that highlights where a focus ought to be for any subsequent development entity. And what came out of it was where we thought would come out of it, this area. But that did give a kind of ballast to institutions in the area, to potential lenders, et cetera, that there's been a process by which, we all get nervous with real estate development in Vermont, that someone will someone will pull the ripcord, and the whole thing goes into an appeals process, and now we're delayed for the 6th or 7th time. And this was giving people some sense of community support for a project. I doubt that you're lacking for community support, but I'm just curious how that has been kind of working with the RPC, working with the entities, how we're getting that sort of momentum to show as well to people that are looking at the project and the outside looking in. That's kind of also why I was interested in your timetable for when you would be looking to deploy any sort of capital use.
I think maybe that is the question to start with, is that we're driven here by GSA's timeline, right? Like that is the reality, and they're not changing their timeline for us, right? So, the auction, the building is listed as coming soon. We anticipate the auction opening in May,
June timeframe, 60-day auction.
60-day auction, and then if we would have a successful bid, we'd have to put a 10% down payment down, and then I believe we have 90 days, 60 or 90 days to close in. So the robust community engagement process that you're really talking about to get buy-in. I mean, I will say I do sit on city council. We've updated city council on this. The commission that the Foundation for Resilient Montpelier was started after the floods, when 1,000 people in Montpelier came together through community forums to talk about what is the future of our city. and this has been one of kind of the most visible projects that we've been a part of. People are aware of it. I think there is a lot of anxiety of like, wait, is the city buying the post office? No, that's not happening. But I think there is support for it. But the timeline is forcing us to deploy capital now to get site control, after which point we're going to have time to categorize the contamination, make those hard decisions that John was talking about, and fully engage the public about, what do we want to see here?
That didn't meet the car. It sounds like there's a public mandate there, which is sort of what that's really what I was hoping to hear.
Honestly, this is not a city that is afraid to debate certain projects. This is not a project where we find much public opposition to the role that we are playing and the vision we've outlined, which is just sort of reactivating the building and putting housing there as well. I would also say having conversation with potential partners to form the LDC has been positive. And they have a sense of the community, and they're not about to wade into a project that they feel like, oh boy, we're gonna, and so to some degrees, those are some key stakeholders around the table as well.
Just to kind of bring on home, I want to be cognizant of your time, and I know that we've got Rick here too. It's just that we really believe that these changes to the RIDIC program are necessary to address this very specific really disaster that's of the federal government's making, right? And it's instances like this where we don't currently have a tool in the economic development toolbox to address these things. This tool seems appropriate. We hope that this fund will continue to be, recapitalized by the state, and ideally there will be revolving funds in nature. But the bottom line is, if we don't, as a state, invest in these kind of signature downtowns and these transformational projects in an appropriate way and an appropriate timeline, we're going to be setting ourselves back years.
Yeah, I know that I appreciate that you guys are really up against it with this, and I'm hoping that you're also getting some help from our federal delegation and negotiating. It's awesome good to hear. This probably, given the timeline, isn't going to be it, but I do hope that this opens an opportunity for us to think about what a framework for transitioning these mostly PC driven buildings into the future, because they are falling on the top of their hands, no matter how you cut it.
Totally. And I will just, as a quick aside, last year for the Rural Caucus Conservation Trust put forward a kind of a series of case studies of public school buildings that have been kind of transitioned to public use. And I do believe there's this kind of anecdotal sense of like, well, it can be a community center and that'll be wonderful. And yet, are we resourcing those communities to be able to, number one, make that transformation, and two, to sustain it? What's the business model that doesn't require public subsidy? Those are really important questions.
Yeah, I have one in Wilmington that's doing amazingly well, but they also because we're experiencing shifts in demographic and grand list values and that sort of thing, it shifts what money is available to them. So
and it's taken over a decade for them to get into that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rick has.
Oh, good.
Thank you, Jess.
You're very welcome.
Yes, Jessica, thanks for your grace and patience. Good morning, everyone,
Good morning.
and thank you all for your long attention to this conversation. I'm Rick Efford Chase. I'm the mayor of Newport, and I'm here representing a totally unified city council, which I think in our case is important to say, because that has not always been the case. In fact, it hasn't even recently been the case. We have an entirely new council in the last 2 years and mayor. And this council is united in their commitment that we are going to change Newport's story. And we've been working to that end for some significant time. We spent the year of 2024 creating a new detailed master plan that lays out an ambitious plan for the next 10 to 15 years of downtown Newport's development. We do that because there is really no other option for Newport to have a future other than the revitalization of our downtown. This is a city that's roughly 7 square miles. Almost all the land in the city has been developed in one way or another already. We have 4,400 residents. We're the ninth highest taxed city, or tax rate in the state of Vermont. In one of the poorest communities in the state of Vermont, our median income, I think this year is somewhere in the neighborhood of $48,000 household income in Newport. So we have, there are just a huge number of challenges confronting this community. There's no way out of it, in my judgment, after a year of serving as mayor and being deeply inside these questions. The only way out of it is a long-term strategy for redevelopment. That detailed master plan called for 410 units of new housing to be built in our downtown core, which is basically 3 blocks of Main Street and then crossing the causeway, for those of you who know the community, and going north as far up through the Waterfront Plaza area and up to Eastside Restaurant. In addition to that, it called for something like 90,000 new square commercial feet of space, retail facing, a new hotel on the waterfront, the only hotel that would be really oriented toward visitors and our downtown core, and a lot of other stuff as well. It's really quite a remarkable feat or challenge that's before us. So, the question is, what has to happen in order for that vision to be realized? The city council passed that plan in December of 2024, roughly 15 months ago now. The next month, we signed a contract with White and Burke Real Estate Advisors to explore the possibility of a tax increment financing district for our downtown. We have been working those numbers and having a lot of conversations weekly with a lot of people trying to make the numbers work. And though I don't think our advisors at White and Burke are quite ready to put their feet down and make this statement quite as boldly as I would, it's my judgment after working with them for a year. By the way, I think they are phenomenal people. Stephanie Clark has been our lead partner in that work, and she's been amazing. My judgment after a year of doing this work is that short of some economic miracles that we can grab out of a hat somewhere, this cannot work. Newport just doesn't have the ability to create enough increment to cover the level of public infrastructure development that would be necessary to turn this community around. And that really is the kind of the framework for why we're here to have this conversation with you this morning. If we could take the big ticket items off the table, the purchase of the distressed block that's now been controlled by a federally appointed receiver for the last almost 11 years now. If we can get that off the table, if we can do, who knows how much, but roughly $3 to $4 million worth of public infrastructure work that would be subsurface water and sewer and above surface transportation funding needed to redevelop that 3-block long corridor of our downtown in order to allow all this other development to happen. We could get that off the table. If we could get the cost of a new parking garage, which we envision going on this block as kind of a foundation for a mixed use building that would have maybe 80 units of housing and maybe a courthouse beside it, if we can work that out with the state. That building is going to cost us, we figure, somewhere between $9 and $12 million. And there's no way in the world that we're going to create enough increment out of TIF to try and make that garage happen. So we've just been invited by NBRC to work out a full-on proposal for a $3.6 million project to do the street work, of which NBRC would be potentially available to help us with $3 million of that project and 80% match to do a bunch of that infrastructure work. We've written proposals in the last 2 weeks with help from some of the folks in our federal delegation offices to Senators Sanders and Welch, asking them to consider the possibility of a congressionally directed spending grant between their offices of $9 million to help us get this garage built. If we could get those two things done and we can get control of the block, which we figure is $1 million project, I'll tell you more about that in a moment, then maybe there's a way that we can make the rest of the TIF opportunity work for the community. And if we can't, we are not done. I want to be really clear. Whatever decision gets made here in this legislature, we are not going to back down. This community wants to take control of its own destiny. It's been the object of forces beyond its control for far too long. And one way or another, we are going to turn this community around. How long that takes is the primary question. How we're going to do it is the big money question for us. So what's going on with the development block as we prefer to call it, as opposed to the pit or the hole. We have been in close conversation with the court-appointed receiver, Michael Goldberg, since July of last year. We drove to Boston last summer, 3 of us from the city of Newport, and met with him in an office in Boston to begin to build a relationship. We've communicated with him basically monthly ever since. I spoke with him as recently as yesterday in person, not in person, but by video conference. And yesterday I said to him, I think that there is a way that with help from the state and the RIDIC program, we can make this thing happen. What's the number that is going to make this work? Because I'm not going to go negotiate with our colleagues in Montpelier for a number that isn't going to work for you. And he said, don't bring me anything that doesn't have a 1 in front of it. Which is to say, we're talking about $1 million purchase price on this plow, which is roughly what we had been assuming. We made an offer, just so you know, on this property at about 2/3 that price, or 3/4 that price, back in November. But it was an offer contingent on a TIF approval, because the only way we could have funded it was through TIF. And basically he said, yeah, that's not going to work for me. I'm not taking, 1, the offer's too low, and 2, even if it were high enough, I can't afford to say yes to you and then wait to see if the TIF process works itself out. The other thing he said to us yesterday was he is insistent that this project, the judge is becoming insistent that his work with the EB5 scandal related properties has to be complete by the end of this year. And we are the last project on the table. So we have a very tight timeline. So what are our options? We have effectively almost no resources. There's no tradable asset owned by the city of Newport that we can use to try and make this project happen. We're sitting on about $300,000 or a little bit more that we have shepherded very carefully in Walmart money that we took in when the Walmart was built in Derby. And so there's money still sitting there that we are using basically as matches wherever we can get grant money. We use that money as a match to try and get things like renderings of buildings drawn or engineering studies on the block that we're talking about. So we've been spending that money and shepherding it very, very carefully, but it's not enough money to make a serious dent in the purchase price of this property. So really, there are no other places to turn, in my judgment. We've turned over every rock we can think of. I will also say that when I became mayor a year ago, I think I came and met with you all just about that time. If I looked a little shell-shocked then, in hindsight, I had good reason. We discovered in the course of a serious level of investigation over the last year that a series of missteps by city leadership had dug a very deep hole. We've just about driven this city financially over the cliff. We have gone back to the voters and gotten permission to manage accumulated deficits that total well over $3 million, plus the cost of another $2.6 million that we just got approval for a bond from the Vermont Bond Bank to pay off a water tower that was approved by the voters 5 years ago. That's now complete, but no one had worked out the financing on that. So in the last year, I've signed an awful lot of loans as recently as last week with that $2.6 million loan. So what I can tell you is that while we don't have any money sitting there as assets, we have our shit together. We understand what our problem is. We've dealt with the accumulated deficit. We've created a new chart of accounts that is intelligible to the average person so that the city council can get reports out of a renewed, we're in a new, using NEMRIC in a new way, and we actually can see what is going on. And we passed a budget that I am fully confident is actually based in reality for next year, as opposed to the budgets we've passed for the last 8 years, which have been entirely divorced from reality. This city, in the water and sewer budget, we allowed a $500,000 a year deficit to go unchecked for the better part of 8 years without raising the rates. Those days are gone. We're taking the political heat. We've raised our sewer and water rates by over 40% in the last year in order to make sure that we are no longer deficit spending in this community. And our budget for this year, we had to increase it by 11% over last year. 7% of that increase was entirely attributable to payments on debt that we had to take on in order to manage accumulated deficit. So I say all of that because one of the things I've been really clear about with everyone locally and here in Montpelier is I will not lie to you about the situation that we confront. We have big challenges in front of Newport. And if we want to turn this community around, it is not an overnight project. I cannot promise the people of Newport that they're going to see their taxes go down next year or the year after that. The only solution is a long-term development strategy that creates a downtown that returns to its once held role as the downtown for all of the northern NEK. So really, we're not trying to build a downtown for 4,400 people. We're trying to build a downtown for 20,000 people who orient like my family has for generations from the village of Lowell toward Newport for all of their economic activity. So here's our bottom line. Without this project, without the RIDIP support, I see no way that Newport digs its way out of the first step of this hole. With this support, if we had a $1 million or close to $1 million commitment from RIDIP, we can see our way through from how we get from here to a purchase of, and control of that block before the end of the year. And yesterday, Mr. Goldberg made it clear to me that he has no intention of going looking for another buyer. We are the option that he is most committed to if we can meet those terms of the timeline and the $1 million price tag. If we don't change the 50% threshold, and I'll just say, Lyle and I spoke as recently as yesterday afternoon, and while we may be playing a little bit of good cop, bad cop this morning, we are clearly united in our desire to see Newport turn around, and we will do whatever it takes. But if we don't get, if all we get is that 50%, then we're gonna have to go look for the other 500,000 somewhere else. The best way to go at that at the moment appears to be, in my judgment, a difficult but potential plan. I'll just rehearse that. Basically, if we got $500,000 through RIDIP that is going to NVDA, Northeastern Vermont Development Association, as our primary economic development partner, and they are fabulous partners. They are more than happy to play this role. Then they have turned in an application to a pre-application to NDRC for another $500,000. The challenge that creates for us is twofold. On the front end, NDRC money triggers the need for a full NEPA study that is likely to drag on for months. Even if we fast track it, it's likely to drag on for months. And I don't have confidence at this point that we can make this happen on the receiver's timeline with that challenge in front of us. On the other end, it creates another challenge, which is that once we take NDRC money, it means that NVDA or the municipality have to hold control of that property for 20 years, which ties our hands in our very next conversation, which is who's the developer that's going to come in and help us to develop what needs to be on that property. Can those problems be overcome? Yeah, I mean, I hope so. And we will do everything possible to make that happen. But the truth is, my number one priority right now is I need $1 million to get that property under our control. The last thing I'll say about that is that we know what it looks like if we don't get control of that property. Ben was describing it, what it looks like here in Montpelier. We have 2 properties currently owned by private individuals that are vacant, and one of them has been vacant for a decade and allowed to simply fall down around itself. We cannot allow this key linchpin property for the city of Newport to languish for another decade. So this is our moment. We have the political will locally to make this happen. We have phenomenal partners at the state level and here in legislature. Every single one of our delegation from the Northern NEK is rock solid in their support that this is the only way forward for the city of Newport. And we've got a receiver who is anxious to deal, which Newport has not had. I mean, Newport has been the last in a very long line for a decade now while he's been working on these other issues. So I've dumped a lot on you. I'll stop there and take any questions or any other dirty laundry you'd like to hear about.
Questions from the mayor? Kurt?
Yeah, because I disagree.
I told Lyle he could leave, but I'm speaking for him from here on out.
So he's part of my thinking. What the chair said, I think about an obligation on the part of federal and state government to clean up the mess or the mistakes or whatever. Might not be a legal obligation, right? But I think it's a moral obligation, and that counts for a lot, certainly in my mind. So, that needs to be, I'm wondering, So that's one point, separate point. You're looking for a grant of $1 million. Um, Usually and I'm sort of mixing moral obligations, legal obligations and stuff like that. Have you talked at all with the corrections and institutions around that kind of an issue? They found a lot of obviously state capital, that kind of stuff. This isn't quite that. It's not state. But then I'm getting back to the idea of, it's a moral obligation. Have you talked about that, your need with them at all?
With corrections and you're talking about with.
I'm talking about the capital.
Discussion's been had with BGS.
Yeah, so if you're talking about BGS, we've been in dialogue with BGS on an every other week basis since August. So I meant to start, and I should have started with a comment that Secretary Clark, Secretary Curley, and Commissioner Jepson, Commissioner Manoli have been significant and important dialogue partners for us for the last 10 months, almost 9 months. So we're meeting with them and with their staff regularly. And part of our development vision for that block is that nearly half of it or half of it will end up being a location for a new courthouse that everybody knows we need in Newport. So yes, we're definitely in conversation. One of the challenges we have there, we actually started the conversation last fall with BGS about the possibility of Newport trying to purchase and subdivide to make a property available. Then we talked about, well, maybe it's BGS purchased the whole thing and makes part of it available to Newport. Honestly, the problem there is timing. It just takes, there's the wheels of those processes grind exceedingly slowly. And so given the urgency, we're anxious to get this deal underway with the receiver. And if we work it out by the end of the year, my guess is NVDA buys the property. They do phase 1 and 2 mitigations, brownfield mitigations on the proper testing, and then begin to do mitigation. And then we divide the property and look for a way to carry on the conversation with BGS about a possible port facility there.
Questions?
Again, appreciate the thoroughness and the not sugarcoating, right, the situation. I truly appreciate that, and I wish more people came here with that unvarnished perspective. One of the things probably has nothing to do with us or this committee, but one of the things that comes to mind is vacancy taxes or those kind of things. Can Newport do that on its own? Is that a tool that you can do? I know that's outside of our.
Are you asking about taxing vacant properties?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I should add to my unvarnished storytelling that we haven't had a city manager in a year and a half. So I've been acting city manager for the last year. And it's given me a very, very deep and intimate look into the workings of all kinds of stuff, including how we manage vacant properties. In my judgment, we are not managing them well. And it's on our list of things that the council wants to work on this year to try and figure out how we're going to begin to look at blighted properties and create enough cost so that it's worth people's while to make sure they don't become blighted or they get done. So it's a priority, but it's not yet risen to the level of highest level of priority.
So when you're looking at the stressed properties, things like that, and I think there's some legal structures for dealing with that. Have you encountered any obstacles in terms of being able to access those statutes to deal with distressed properties and being able to acquire them so they can subsequently use them for commercial housing?
I think it's unlikely that we're going to end up in the business of trying to acquire those properties. The likelihood is that what we're doing is forcing a sale.
Yeah, I understand. It might not be right on point, but I got roped into a working group on a land bank kind of issue. I think it's mostly focused on housing, but they raised a bunch of different procedural issues for any owner, whether it's the city or some other entity, to be able to identify, show that it's distressed and then work through the process.
In the
Has any of
short term-
that come up on the radar screen?
No, effectively not yet. I mean,
That's all right.
I will say that we've got, we've got a downtown that is a third vacant at this point. We also have some really key assets in our downtown. Pick and Shovel is an incredible asset. The Work Commons and Green Mountain Natural Food Cafe. And, so we have some really committed business people who are really working with us to help try and bring this downtown back to life. We have a couple of key properties, the most significant of them being the JJ Newberry Department Store building that is literally, it's been unattended for so long that we're now worried about safety. And, the conversation we want to have with the owners on that one is, look, let's just make either sell it to someone who wants to develop it because it's a clear development opportunity, or bring it up to speed yourself. You got to do one or the other, or we're going to make it painful for you. I think those are the kinds of conversations we're about to have.
What, so you're a weak mayor system?
Yes, we should have a city manager. Our city council has had a city manager council form of government since 1967. And we are right now we just started a search with Dominic Cloud from VLCT. So I expect that I hope we'll have a city manager in place by the end of June.
Bless your heart. I'm sorry you're having to go through that. Yeah. Wow, sorry. And as for the JJ Newberry's building, I feel your pain on that because we had our JJ Newberry's closed down.
Yes, you're in Barry. Yeah, I've been watching the Barry conversation too, believe me, with a lot of interest.
Did you have the same problem with the owner of the building? Like, you can buy it for like $1.4 million.
So I don't know yet, because we haven't had, serious money to put on the table, what that owner might really be able to be willing to accept. I'm not sure, but we're trying to maintain a positive relationship there. And I've been in conversation with the owner numerous times. So I think, a lot of what we just keep saying, we need our first crane on Main Street. Honest to God, we just got to show people, both locally and developers, that yes, Newport has a trajectory that's headed up and not down. And I think some of those folks will likely come around in that process.
So I'm thinking, thinking back to the opportunity zone era.
Yeah.
Like what are the assets that we have? And important seeing all of the two cycle strategy, all both for opportunity zones. What kind of, and how the up zones worked out around the state, just vary, which one market to the next. Did you see much action through opportunity funds, qualified investments through that? Or because they don't really tell you, so it's hard to know sometimes, but I was just wondering how that played out.
So I'm new enough to not really be able to fully answer that question. I've only been on the scene really in Newport for 2 years. But my judgment is that Newport was not, for whatever reason, was not able to really capitalize on the opportunities in the previous iteration. My hope, I have a lot of hope actually, that in Opportunity Zone 2.0, we're going to see a new day.
So that I was sort of thinking of where, working with, we're working with, entities like, okay, where are we gonna go?
Yep.
To, new markets tax credits, appetite for that, really animated by changing the tax code. And so opportunity fund shows up. But I'm just curious if you're thinking along the lines of where do we take this, as and not simply like it's so hard to focus on acquisition and then what's and
Yeah.
then we're ready to go to
That's a great question. Yes, the answer is absolutely, right? Like, we've been meeting with developers since before August with one developer in particular. And one of the challenges that is really clear is that, let's say we get control of this property. The truth is that right now, getting numbers to pencil for any developer on any project in the state is not an envious task, right? Like, it is hard work. So we know that we're gonna have to do Herculean effort every single step of the way. One of the things I wrote in my notes as I was thinking, as I came down this morning, I was thinking about what I wanted to say to y'all. And one of the things I wanted to make clear is if we are to be successful, there will be a series of heroic moments that have to happen from now through the next 10 to 15 years. And I can't even begin to foresee most of them. But I'll tell you what, this is clearly the first, right? If I can get us over this first hurdle, It keeps us in the game for the next conversation and the one after that. And what I can commit to you is that this is a community whose time has come. They are clear that they're ready to really take this on.
Any other questions for the mayor? Great, thank you.
I am so grateful to be invited into this conversation. So thank you all. It's nice to actually begin to feel like I have some people around the table that I recognize after the last couple of years. And Jessica, I apologize to you because having made you wait so long, I have to rush back to Newport. It's great to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
Let me slide out before you slide in.
Yeah.
Have a great day, everybody.
Sure.
Oh, no, it's outside.
Full battery and I'm fine.
That's Rick.
Wait,
Rick for that.
Probably will leave again. Like 45. There's
There's not a pit in this state. These how many communities, everybody's ends up going out the pit. It's way to set those, nobody calls it the pit anymore, right? It's being built right to that. It's something else. Huge building, huge building. And if you've been to Wellington, it's the newest building is, 300 units. 300 units. It's still, it's probably a year, but it's 11 stories tall. Hotels open house 25 units of house. They from executive director of the Democratic Party was like, wow. It's like 25, the top 3 floors, or I'm not sure how many floors are housing, and the rest is. Oh, looking at living area, they're not in the villa house.
Yes, what do you got?
It's pretty good project. With cheese crackers.
They're all.
With the paper.
Got it. Pretty much.
And there's mandarins fitting what's out.
For some time, she's not. Um. You guys can see that? All right. Morning.
Good morning, Jen.
Everyone, nice to see you all. So for the record, I'm Jessica Hartleben. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Economic Progress Council. I am here today to talk to you about the VEGgie program. But before I talk to you about that, Paramarka asked me to give you a brief update about the CHIP program. So I feel like I will start with that, because why not? I was here in a joint hearing on January 9th. And it was about 2 weeks before the launch of the CHIP program. We launched the CHIP program on January 30th. And that was our official opening of the portal. And that was the sign for Vermont communities that they could access the program and began looking at the application to see what municipalities would need to start creating their CHIP applications. So I just want to give you an update, and again, thank you for your hard work the last legislative session and what we have been up to since the last 60 days. It's been 60 days since we launched the program. So just to kind of level set, I just really think it's so unique that CHIP isn't a program that has existed anywhere else in the state of Vermont. It's actually a program that's unique to anywhere in the United States. We do have other TIF programs throughout the United States that focus on affordable housing, but this is a program that has taken a lot of different elements of TIF, and we've kind of morphed it into making it our own. So for that, we are unique. Every one of the pieces had to be purpose-built for Vermont's very specific statutory frameworks. And with our now team of 3 at BEPC, we have worked with partners across ACCD, across the Agency of Digital Services, and other state agencies to build out this program in that very compressed timeline. Since January, we have had webinar series that cover how TIF works. We've used national case studies of communities that have used TIF for housing and infrastructure programs, and that have used those specific rules and requirements that have helped municipalities outline Vermont's CHIP program. The sessions are all recorded and they're posted on our CHIP webpage for municipalities that missed those live sessions. So you can go online and you can watch them at any time. Additionally, we have worked with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. The Vermont League of Cities and Towns received a $500,000 NVRC grant to launch a technical assistance program. It's called CHIP in Vermont, and I would encourage you to invite in Katie Buckley and Bonnie Waninger. They are leading the charge for that technical assistance program, and if you want to get the specifics about that, they are experts in talking about that 3-year initiative. We did partner with them to do a delivery of an introductory CHIP webinar that drew over 100 attendees for municipalities and municipal leaders. The session covered how CHIP works, why municipalities might want to apply for the CHIP program, explanations about grand list growth, an overview of the CHIP guidelines. VLCT committed to doing webinar series throughout 26 and into 27, covering a variety of topics from project readiness, pre-development planning, bond campaigns, risk management, and compliance. We have an ongoing partnership with them. So we feel like this will help municipalities have that structured support that they will need through every stage of this program, and also ensuring that municipalities of every size will be able to get the support that they're going to need. Additionally, Our staff, VEPSI staff offered office hours throughout the month of February to ensure that the application process was clear and accessible for communities of every size. These were not passive sessions. We offered assistance to municipalities. We also provided a train the trainer for VLCT so that we could troubleshoot how to log into the GEARS portal, but also how to access the application and answer any questions that the user guide, which is also on our website, could not answer. We hope to offer those again in the future at some time in the spring or summer. Additionally, we've had direct stakeholder engagement alongside our large format webinars. We have presented to a wide range of groups in the last 60 days. We presented to the Regional Development Corporation at their monthly meeting. We've presented to many regional planning commissions, including we are going on April 14th to the Northwest Regional Planning Commission, to the town of St. Albans. We've presented to the Housing and Homeless Alliance of Vermont, the Vermont Bankers Association, Commercial Lending Committee, the Southern Vermont Economic Development and Municipal Leaders Conference in Wilmington, and we presented to the Newport Downtown Development Housing Committee. In total, our team has presented to over a dozen formal presentations since October of 2025, and we've reached audiences in every corner of the state of Vermont. And we hope to continue that engagement throughout 2026. So this is kind of what we've been seeing in the last 60 days. It's still early, but the data that we're seeing reflects genuine geographical diversity from our municipalities. VEPSI has received 10 interest forms. VLCT has noted that they have received interest from municipalities spanning 10 counties. We have had webinar attendance of 250 all 250 municipalities, and webinars from 250 participants. We provided 6 office hour sessions, and VLCT is beginning office hours starting in April. Additionally, interest is coming from not just Chittenden County. It's really outside Chittenden County, and that's of note. The population range of interested communities spans municipalities with population densities as low as 1,100 and as large as 22,000. So both rural communities and more large population centers are engaged in the process. The projects are both contemplating affordable and middle income housing as well as the market rate housing. CHIP is being seen as a full spectrum for housing needs in the state, not just one type of housing.
Yeah, can you go back to the density issues, numbers? And I kind of had trouble figuring out density to what it might look like as a town. But what was the range? I think you said 1,100?
Yeah, so
per whatever.
population, so density is the population of the town.
Oh, you meant population.
Yeah,
Amount,
not like
numbers.
the density,
Okay, so
like the downtown,
population of 1,100 to
22,000.
Okay, thank you.
The pre-interest application form that we created with VEPSI is not just the sign-up sheet. The pre-interest application form collects data and allows our staff to engage not only the municipal interest, but identify where technical assistance might be needed, so that we can then forward that to VLCT so that VLCT can follow up with those municipalities to then help municipalities with that particular technical assistance that they may need in order to bring back to VEPSI an efficient application and review when those projects are then filed and brought forward to the staff for a formal review. So what comes next? On our municipal side, the communities appear from VLCT's feedback to be moving through these pre-development process. They seem to be refining project narratives, working with VLCT through their technical assistance program, as that is getting ramped up. On the Betsy side, our team is continuing to build out the system portal. We are launching the application was just one piece of that portal. This portal is going to help us not only with applications, but it's going to be the place where municipalities will be able to report information, upload data, and help us to prepare the reports that the legislature needs in order for us to be able to report that information back to you, and for us to be able to calculate increment and also work with department facts. So we are in the process of designing those processes. Never in my education did I think I would be a software developer, but here we are. So we're designing those processes to be rigorous, to be efficient, so that municipalities can use those in a timely and efficient way. Upcoming engagements for our Betsy team include the Vermont Community Development Association Summit, which is happening on April 15th. Here in Montpelier, the Southern Vermont Economy Summit in May, and then continued regional presentations throughout the state. Our team is really committing to making sure every Vermont community that wants to use CHIP has access to the information and the support that it needs to do so. So we are committed to working with the RDCs and the RPCs. We coordinated with the town of St. Albans. They're hosting the event, but it's coordinating with the Northwest Regional Planning Commission, the RDC in Grand Isle County, and the RDC in Franklin County to help us do the promotion so that those that region is covered. We've done similar events in Chittenden County, Rutland County, Windham and Bennington counties. So that is our 60-day update. I just want to close by thanking you for the work that you did last year, and that we really have created a powerful tool. And I'm really excited to see what the summer is going to bring, and that we're hoping that we start seeing the first round of applications in the next maybe 90 days or so.
Okay.
Any questions?
Is there a financial room to work with the VLCT? Like, we're gonna come with the VLCT with this, with these, the central assistance. This new budget, is that organized on their own? Is there?
They received a $500,000 MBRC grant to provide 3 years of technical assistance. And they're standing up that program separate from the Agency of Commerce or from Betsy.
So this is important for us to remember that there is that support is in there, and to see who's going to come through that system, how will it benefit them in getting through and participating in CHIP. That's just one of the most important things I think for the community to bear in mind, that we have that $500,000 grant went in to assist the VLCT to do this work. So,
Yeah, I will say that ACCD did apply for $500,000 in congressionally directed spending to Senator Welch and Senator Sanders' office for a feasibility study for municipalities under 5,000 to assist with those upfront costs, to help those municipalities that may not have the budgets to fund those upfront costs that are eligible related costs that could be repaid with CHIP increment, but maybe not something that those municipalities could afford at the outset. So the Agency of Commerce submitted that request
I believe, or the governor's office submitted that request to Senator Sanders and Senator Welch's office, I believe last week. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for again, trying to help those smaller communities. Because, and I guess I just want to encourage you to continue to do more of that.
Yeah.
Because you said the population of the range from 1,100 to 10,000. And the mode, remember, median mode, the most common population size in Vermont is less than 1,000.
Yeah.
For the towns. So if it's 1,100 and more, you're missing, the most of the towns in the state.
Right, and that number actually came from VLCT, towns that had reached out to VLCT. I will tell you, when I was in Wilmington, actually, we did a speaking engagement with the it's the Southern Vermont.
The Deerfield Valley Chamber? Or
No, it was the
Wilmington Works?
Nope, it was a Southern Vermont combination of the both of the RDCs.
Oh, yeah.
Southern Vermont, the BCRC and the BDCC. And we talked to a community as small as Wardsboro, which I think is, what is that, like 200? Very small. So VEPC has numbers, VLCT has numbers. I just was trying to be efficient in that. But yes,
I just always want to make that reminder.
thank you for reminding us, because that's always in the back of my mind. Having said that, I have 10 minutes to go through what I was originally here to come talk to you about today. And I am happy to come back and do a deeper dive into veggie.
Yeah, I saw the
And
report just came out.
Yes.
Yeah, she sent it.
Yeah.
I sent a veggie report that actually was submitted to the legislature in September
Okay.
of
We haven't
2025,
had a chance to go through.
which you probably, right. Because it's summer and reports come out in September. So have fun reading that 50-page report. And I will just give you some highlights of that 50-page report in my presentation today. And then happy to come back again and go into a deeper dive. Because I like coming to this committee. It's actually, I like coming and talking. So as you may or may not know, the Vermont Economic Progress Council is an independent board of Vermont citizens. 9 are appointed by the governor, 2 are appointed by the General Assembly. You have one of our members here in this committee, Representative Abby Duke, and Senator Wendy Harrison from Windham County is our senator. We also have 2 non-voting representatives from each region, and one is designated by the Regional Development Corporation, as one is designated by the Regional Planning Commissions. We are the approval body for not only the veggie program, but also the TIF program and the CHIP program. We are a lean staff. The council is served by 1 executive director, 1 program manager, and 1 CHIP specialist. We do receive our administrative support from not only the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, but also from the Vermont Department of Taxes. And we rely heavily on the Vermont Department of Taxes for the veggie program. So the legislative purpose of veggie is really important. Veggie is a revenue sharing arrangement. The state only shares tax revenues that would not exist without this program. Veggie, the thing that distinguishes veggie from all other programs is that veggie isn't a subsidy. The but-for test is the test that is kind of the elephant in the room. It is the policy debate that has stood for the test of time. It is the one that has been talked a lot about in this building way before me, and probably will live on past my time. Having said all of that, before BEPC authorizes a single dollar, the BEPC Council must make affirmative decisions that the proposed jobs, the payroll growth, and the capital investments would not occur in Vermont, or would occur in a significantly less beneficial way to the state of Vermont, except for this incentive. If a company is coming to Vermont anyway, they don't qualify for this program. There is no exception to that. In fact, we regularly meet with businesses. We screened 27 businesses last year. Of those 27 businesses, 2 made it through the program to the final application. There is a screening process that happens. It happens for a reason. BEPC's staff work with the state economist, and we use, let's go here. We use the REMI model, which is the same model that the state uses for its own fiscal analysis, to project new tax revenues that the job expansions will generate. The incentive is only authorized if those projected revenues exceed the cost. Vermont must come out ahead in the cost benefit analysis model. It's a statutory requirement. It's built right into the program. It's not a policy preference. It's not something BEPC the council can deviate from. It's a requirement. It's a safeguard that's built into the program. Once the incentives are approved by the council, the business must then do what they say they're going to do. The Department of Tax has to verify actual payroll records before any incentive payment is given to the business. The incentive is then paid as a credit against their withholding taxes. The state is essentially returning a portion of the new tax revenues that only existed because the expansion happened. If the performance targets are not met, nothing is paid. If employment collapses or the business leaves, previously paid incentives are recaptured by the Department of Tax. VEGI is a tax expenditure. It's worth contextualizing the program's cost. VEGI is classified as a tax expenditure. In 2023, Vermont's total individual income tax expenditures, because that's where this program is categorized in the JFO report, was approximately $378 million. Of that, VEGI represented 0.6% of that total. Annual incentive payments have a range between 1.97 million and 3.2 million over recent years. This is a modest targeted state investment. And if you want some additional data, I would encourage you to look at pages 29 through 33 of the VEGI report, which shows slightly more detail about the claims data. So this is what that modest state investment has produced between 2007 and 2023. More than $10,000 or more than 10,000 new qualifying jobs have been created, $613 million in new qualifying payroll, $1.2 billion in new capital investment, $41.5 million in total new incentives paid. For every dollar that's paid out in earned VEGI incentives, $42.70 is generated in payroll and capital investment that otherwise would not be occurring in Vermont. All qualifying positions must also have 3 employment benefits in addition to the minimum wage thresholds. In 2023, the average wage for new VEGI qualifying jobs was over $83,000. And that's compared to the Vermont statewide average range of $62,000. It could be argued that Vermont is driving above average wage growth in the state. So I just want to give you a concrete example, and I realize I have 3 minutes. Weidman Electrical Technology in St. Johnsbury has operated in Vermont's Northeast Kingdom for over 54 years, and they are highlighted in our VEGI report. They produce transformer board. Transformer board is found in over 80% of electrical transformers worldwide. I didn't know this until I went with Representative Marcotte last summer, and saw the transformer board. The only place in the United States where it's manufactured is right here in Vermont. When Weidman was evaluating where to expand globally to meet the surging demand from aging electrical infrastructure and new data centers, Veggie was an integral part of their decision to invest here in Vermont or go out of state, or frankly, in another part of the world. The result was a $43 million project that is now underway, creating 67 new jobs and creating local construction with local Vermont contractors. And this photo is from the construction that was happening when we went there last summer to do a site visit. Less than a year after the approval of this Veggie Award, Weidman had already welcomed in 38 new employees, far ahead of their first year targets. This is the but-for test in action. Without that Veggie incentive, that investment would likely have gone elsewhere. S327 is going to eliminate the sunset, making Veggie a permanent program while maintaining annual reporting and continued legislative oversight. VEPSI supports this approach for 3 reasons. First, a permanent structure creates predictability for employers and for the state. As we've heard from Megan and also from Commissioner Jepson today, economic development requires long-term planning. Second, S327 preserves that continual annual reporting and evaluation by the legislature. The transparency and accountability remain fully intact, and it's necessary to preserve that for maintaining public trust in this program. Thirdly, and most importantly, in my opinion, an independent evaluation of Veggie that was conducted by the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness, which we hired to come as part of our VEPSI retreat this fall, confirmed that the program has significant program strengths, but also identified areas where we can explore some programmatic opportunities. Those programmatic opportunities, however, cannot happen efficiently when the program's very existence is perpetually in question. If you make Veggie permanent, it frees up VEPSI and VEPSI staff to improve the program, not just to be continually coming back here to defend it. So I just will leave you, and I know I'm a minute over, with some closing thoughts. There's already very strenuous, strong safeguards in place. The but-for test and the REMI fiscal analysis are applied rigorously before any incentive is authorized. There is no rubber stamping of this program. Regular reporting to the legislature is required by statute, as you have evidenced in your email by a 59-page annual report that you will now have the pleasure of reading. And critically, and most importantly, the Department of Tax has to verify, per the statute, all payroll performance before incentives are paid. If you don't meet your targets, you do not receive the money. CREC found that Veggie's pay for performance structure and the ROI analysis is one of the most fiscally rigorous of any comparable program in the Northeast. Additionally, I just want to mention one other point that the CREC also mentioned. Vermont is the only state in our region without a permanent, broad-based business incentive program. And that is important when we're thinking about businesses and keeping businesses here in Vermont. Every peer state, New York, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Connecticut, operates its equivalent program on a permanent basis. CREC found that we were at a competitive disadvantage every year the sunset uncertainty continues. And that was an important piece for me in that report. That we want, in order to remain competitive and keep our businesses here, the other piece that CREC found is that businesses that we are attracting to Veggie are not businesses that are moving here, they're businesses that are expanding here. And they're looking elsewhere to expand, and Veggie is keeping them here. And so in order to remain economically competitive and to keep them here so that they'll expand here, keeping this program on a permanent basis allows for that to continue. I'm 4 minutes over. Thanks.
You waited all morning for us.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize.
That's my super high level overview. I would be happy to come back with the Department of Tax to give you a deeper dive into the claims and how that works. I would, if you are wanting more information about the CREC analysis, I know that Bob Isaacson and Tyler Baines were our presenters. I did give their information to Senate Economic Development, and I'm happy to give it to Jonathan, and they could come and talk to you as well.
I think that would be an interesting conversation.
Yeah,
Better understand.
just to better understand incentives and why they matter and how they keep us competitive as a state. I'm gonna stop sharing my
Yeah,
screen.
they did a great job at the retreat. Very knowledgeable.
Okay. Any questions for Justin? Reggie?
I guess, I'm sorry to keep everybody here. It's my stomach that's gonna be complete first, for sure. In the 2023, in the report, in 2023, there are a lot of zeros in the amount of incentives that were given out or payroll amounts, things like that. Is that just because it was a dip, right? In, where employment rate is so low, it was really hard for employers to meet the targets that they hit that year? Or is it because data just wasn't available at the time of the report? So I'm trying.
I guess I'd want to know where the zeros are. That
Yeah, starting on page 33, I think, 30.
Oh, it might just, it probably was might not have been available. 2023 target.
Yeah, it's every.
It may not have been available. I can get back to you on that. I can ask tax, and get back to you on that. Happy to come back. These reports, we get the information and then we have to submit it by September 1st, so. That's the best.
That was my guess, was that it just wasn't available, but maybe there's a better way than putting a zero there and just to say data not available. So nobody looking at it is wondering.
Right. Let's see.
Well,
That's right.
no, I mean, there are lots of reasons that it could be a zero, but if it is just because the data isn't available, it's different.
Yeah, I'll get back to you on that with that answer.
Thank you.
Anything else for Jeff?
It's so important to go through the report and see the variety of locations across the state that the businesses are using the incentive.
Yeah.
It's a very detailed report and it's really helpful. So thank you.
Yeah.
And thank Ellie.
Yeah.
We've seen, there have been a slow applications in Veggie and
We have 3 that are interested in applying currently this year for 26. We had 2 successful applicants in 2025. Sure. Great.
it's good, but it still shows, you know, employment rates are low. It's hard for businesses to get people to work. There's a lot of different reasons why.
Yeah. It's a commitment
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, and it's with an unsure supply of workers, it's tough for business to take on. It's hard for them to fill their needs right now. And then to take on additional workers that they might not need, but they want to put a new program together, then there's a lot of reasons.
Right, but then we have that. We have that argument. But then we also have Weidman as an example of an enormous success.
Yep.
And so there is that, you can appreciate that tension.
Yep. I mean, I'm not suggesting we get rid of the program, not
Right.
at all. I think it's it's valuable. I think we need to keep it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, programs run very well.
Thank you.
So, there's a lot of confidence in how that's important. That's important. Should.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, as a member of the board, I've been really impressed at the way it's managed, the rigorous nature of the analysis. And it is really a very small number of companies that the companies it works well for, it can work really well for, but those, I mean, we've all been talking about that. It is really a very small subset of companies for a variety of reasons that it can work for. But we have some very big success stories like Whiting. So, anyway, I've learned a lot being on the board, so thank you.
We appreciate your participation on the board. Your valued member.
Well, thank you.
And I am appreciative of the work that is being proposed in S 327 of the commissioner and the deputy commissioner. They kind of take a holistic look. And start the conversation.
Okay.
Great.
So we're 10 minutes
Thank you.
over, so. Take a little less time for lunch, but we're on the floor at 1. I think Ian has us estimated to be done by 2.
Yeah.
So we're back in here. We will hear from the Vermont Trailways piece that's in 327. Rick will walk us through the new language that's in 327, and then at 3:30, Stokey will come in. We'll talk about S-173, the book rehab worker comp bill.
Okay.
Kind of see where. So with that, we can go off to Larry.